Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Yeah.
I'm hungry.
And
I'm cold.
your voice sounds fantastic, honestly. I wasn't...
I
Right.
do, man. And
Okay.
you look lovely and svelte and slim and like Nureyev.
Thank you.
Right, okay.
We'll edit those bits out. Well, hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Biology Garden. And in this video, I've travelled to Stourbridge to meet a man who I think is a very, very good naturalist. And it's not just me, Stephen Moss also agrees. And Brett, I would like to introduce you as the naturalist that you are, but also you've done many, many other things with your life, haven't you? So we'll come on to your books in a little while. And more importantly, I would love to talk to you about this garden in particular, because as you can see, it is a beautiful wildlife garden and it really has got many, many different, well, plants as well as insects and other things, and you've actually got some quite rarities here in this garden, haven't you?
I like it because it's an urban garden. We've got the town centre of Stourbridge just 5 minutes walk away here, busy traffic over there, and yet this is what estate agents always call the old quarter, because that adds a few pounds to it. But basically it's the old slums, I think. It's the area where lots of Victorian houses were built. But the great thing about Victorian gardens is often they're quite long. It's a very narrow garden, but it's a long garden, and it's got mature plants in it. The trees around are often not planted by anybody. They've sort of evolved. A lot of them are sycamores or whatever, and there are trees in the background. So it actually feels quite secluded, even though you're in a fairly an area of dense housing. So I love it. I like the challenge of using the sun, using the shade. I've got a great love of dappled things. You know, the poet Gerard Manley Hopkins, he always said, "Glory be to God for dappled things." And when I think about that, I always think about the light filtering through at the top of the garden, filtering through the leaves, and speckled woods dancing about, and then a brilliant dappled butterfly as well. So I made the best of what was probably a difficult job here. Most of the plants in the borders, if they like the sun, they all try and find their way to the middle of the garden. So you find the back of these narrow borders is very shady, and yet the flowers all try and get onto the lawn.
Quite.
So it's a bit of a challenge.
No, I can see, but what a well, a very good example of a wildlife garden it is, and we shall come on to that in a little while. But I mean, firstly, if I may, I'd like to kind of touch on Brett Westwood, the radio presenter, because I must admit, when I first got to know Nikki, it was a bit of a three-way relationship, because we would go to bed at night listening to tardigrades, and other wonderful things about the natural world, obviously through some of the series that you've done through Radio 4, which is, would you agree, is where you're probably most well known?
Yeah, it's really strange because you don't feel that doing natural history on Radio 4 is any grounds for being a celebrity or well known. I don't see it that way, or I don't hear it that way at all. I was just somebody doing a job, but I was very fortunate to be doing a job that I really enjoy, and I was able to meet so many marvellous people through that job. To be paid for your hobby, well, it's not more than a hobby, it's an absorbing passion, I suppose. But to be paid for that and to meet people who are really good at it, meet the experts, is a real privilege. So yes, it's been marvellous. And that particular series with the tardigrades in was something called Natural History.
That's right,
We made 99 of those. And
I've not quite listened to all of them yet,
no,
but we're not far off.
Well, do some catching up, pay attention. But they are great, and I really enjoyed them because working very closely with the producers had some great ideas, and we were able to meet people. It wasn't just about straightforward natural history, it wasn't all about scientists. We were able to whiz off to the British Museum or meet chefs. I think Lawrence Llewellyn-Bowen took place in one about the peacock, so you never knew quite what direction those programs were going to take. Ants took us into communism and Marxism and militarism. I ended up presenting that from the very top of St Paul's Cathedral, looking down. Don't ask me how it happened, but I think that's what's so exciting about natural histories. It was about the way animals influence our world in so many ways: cooking, religion, music, poetry, philosophy, the lot.
Oh yeah, and obviously with it being radio as well, it's a great media because it really makes us conjure up imagery, doesn't it? Whereas it's so easy to switch on a TV or go on YouTube, for example, and watch something, but obviously you know, hearing a voice on radio explain something, there is an art to it, and I think I can safely say you've perfected that art, because I love the way you describe, you know, the behaviours of certain animals, and it really does paint a very vivid picture, and I love that about
well
radio.
That's good. I was always told by people who knew a lot more about it than I did when I started, not to describe the minutiae of something, but to give people a really good impression, an angle on something. So a peacock butterfly, you know, is a very, very beautiful Art Deco thing, you know, and it does remind me of something that was, you know, thought up by an Art Deco artist. So I'd rather say that than say, well, its hind wing has a bit of blue here and some brown there, or whatever.
It's got two fake eyes.
Yes, exactly. you don't need to say that. You need to give the overall impression of something.
Yes.
Stephen Moss and birders will tell you it's about jizz.
It is.
General impression and shape, or however that word, whatever that word means. So I think on radio you're doing the same, and you're also trying to infuse things with an individuality as well. So it's not, you know, people say, well, they all look the same to me. You know, this cabbage white's the same as that wood white. Well, of course, they're very, very different beings. Yeah. So I suppose it's that sense of inculcating. That's a very posh word, but
it's a bit posh for me.
Encouraging people to think differently about something. That's what I really like.
Yeah. No, and it shines through, obviously. And so the natural histories, as you say, they sound very fun to have made. But you're also known as well for Tweet of the Day, which is, of course,
yes,
here's one I found earlier.
Oh, right,
might as well do a bit of shameless plug, which is a wonderful, wonderful book written with somebody called Stephen Moss.
Yes, would you like to know the story of how I allowed him onto my territory?
Go on then.
We're very territorial, we birders, a bit like blackbirds, really.
Yes.
Tweet of the Day was an idea we came up with in radio for giving people a short burst of birdsong and a story about it. And we used to sit around at our morning meetings and come up with ideas that we'd have to sell to the Radio 4 commissioners. And I think I can't remember who exactly, I think Julian Hector, our boss at the time, I think he was the one who actually came up with the title Tweet of the Day. But I was charged with writing the scripts for them, and also charged with deciding which species would be there. Now at the time there were just under 600 species on the British list when we started out in 2013.
Wow.
And the idea was that we'd begin it on Dawn Chorus Day 2014. So we had to start writing them really early.
Yeah.
And so it was very easy when it came to things like cuckoo. Yeah. But when you got to fill a whole year of tweets, then you think, well, not everything makes such a distinctive sound. So there are lots of challenges ahead of us. First of all, which species did we include? Did we include songs as well as calls as well as songs? Because the cuckoo is not a call at all. It's a song of the male cuckoo.
That's right.
They make totally different calls. So we had all that to do. How many vagrants should we include? You know, should we include birds that are well known, or should we include birds that come over here and don't actually they don't sing here, they just pass through? We went to Radio 4 and the commissioning editor and the controller said, we want all the birds on the British list, and then they told us the budget. So, you know, at sixpence a throw, it was going to be very difficult. We've got to rely a lot on library archive recordings. So we did that, and we did have some money to go and get some specific recordings. So we drew up the list. Then there was the matter of the slot, and there was a lot of argy-bargy over where we put this programme. We thought actually originally that we'd put it in the Thought for the Day slot on the Today programme, and that was fiercely resisted by probably numerous bishops. So that didn't happen. But we managed to snip, I think it was 2 minutes off Farming Today, just before the Today programme began. So at 5:58, if you'd been awake on May the 6th, 5:58 Dawn Chorus Day, you would have heard David Attenborough describe the cuckoo. We also had to get the wording right, because, you know, 70 seconds, say, by the time you've taken out your introduction and your closing comments by the presenter, you've got very little time, actually. And so what we ended up with was having to write about 70 seconds of script. and allow for 20 seconds of bird song within that script as well, which could be placed about. So, and I normally go about 3 words per second, so about 210 words per bird.
Yeah.
You try writing about a cuckoo in 210 words. I found that quite difficult. So it's what you leave out.
Yes.
That was the problem. You know, Sartre, the French philosopher, was famous. No, it wasn't Sartre. It was the guy who did Candide. I've forgotten his name. French author. Once said, I would have written you a shorter letter, only I didn't have time. And I think that is the problem. Writing short stuff I found was a real challenge. It was a real exercise for me, because I wrote 380 of these scripts. They were tweets, international tweets. There was a series, but the first series it was all British birds. So it was a real challenge. I loved it, but they wanted a book at the same time, and I said, come off it. You know, we've got to get the radio script sorted. But also we've got to get the recording. People got to get the recordings ready. We had to go out and organise 1 or 2 bespoke recordings, and they said, well, we'd like a book as well. So I got my old friend Stephen Moss, who's a very prolific and well-known bird writer, and I said, Stephen, can you help me with this? So basically, as he will tell you, and no doubt has told you, he looked at my scripts and put the adjectives back in. And so we ended up with longer pieces about it, and we got some beautiful illustrations by Carrie Ackroyd, and it worked as a book. But it was an exciting piece of radio for me, because it was very short. And it taught me about the value of brevity, something I'm not demonstrating now in this answer to you. But it is really important to be succinct and pull things together, and also go for the headlines and go for the things people didn't really need to know. Everybody knows about cuckoos, they lay their eggs in other birds' nests. David Attenborough presented that programme, so we got David Attenborough to say that people used to think that the cuckoo, because it disappeared in winter, turned into a sparrowhawk because it looks like one. And I really like those little stories, the angles that perhaps people didn't know so well. So it was great fun tweet of the day, but it wasn't without its controversy. I don't know whether you know about this, but I presented one lot of them. We got people like David Attenborough, which we were delighted to have, and it's very important that David Attenborough kicked off the series and in fact ended the first year as well. But we got other people. Chris Packham did some for us. Did Kate Humble do some for us? Yes, she did. We got a lot of people. Bill Oddie. We got a lot of people who were well known in the natural history world, and it was great to have them doing them for us. But I did one month. I think I did September, and I included some vagrant birds from North America, the mourning dove, and 1 or 2 birds that pass through, like the Australian Bunting, which the French like eating. And somebody wrote to one of the red tops and said, why is Brett Westwood including all these birds? They're not even British. And Radio Times got hold of it and said, they published the letter. And so we were asked why we were including birds that weren't British. And of course we were able to say, well, thanks to the British Ornithologists Union, they actually decide what's a British bird. And if a bird has occurred here naturally, even only once, unassisted by us, so it hasn't come over on a ship or come out of the hold of a plane or whatever, and that has happened, then it is judged a British bird.
Right, wow.
And so we were able to give a nice full answer to that. So all the birds we chose were genuinely British birds. Well, yes, it was satisfying, because I think there was an undercurrent there as to these aren't British birds because they don't breed here. What I did say was actually, well, the male cuckoo spends about 2 months here each year. It's an African bird.
Yes,
So, and yet we regard the cuckoo as the quintessential sign that spring has arrived. So it was great, and lots of things popped up as a result of that. And so Tweet of the Day I thought was a fabulous exercise. What I didn't expect, it's still running. They are still repeating them in that 2-minute slot. So occasionally I'll wake up bleary-eyed one morning or bleary-eared if you can be, and turn the radio on, and it'll say, and now David Attenborough tells us about the swift or the cuckoo, and I think, it's still going.
Well, there you go.
It's a bit like the swift, as Ted Hughes said, back again, shows the world's still working.
Yeah. And actually, you reminded me, I was listening to the Australian Bunting the other day, and it shows how good my memory is. There was some quite gruesome facts about, the way that it was eaten. And it was, Aren't they boiled alive or something? Like?
They used to. I think they were. They're now. There's a huge campaign, obviously, to stop this, and I think they're still eaten as delicacies. I think President Mitterrand was served.
Yeah.
Ortolan buntings when he retired, wasn't he? On his retirement, when he
Yeah.
stepped down. Yes. So I don't know. Don't want to go too far down that road because I don't know exactly how they're prepared now. But things are getting better.
But it's certainly a very good way of just, you know, that 2-minute clip is a good way of just, you know, feeding information to somebody that they might not remember it from one day to the next, but then they might hear one that just sticks in them, and you know, maybe, just maybe, that might then stay with them for when they have an experience in the natural world with one of these birds. So I think it's a really good way of kind of just drip feeding, you know, the natural world into society, where people might not normally know about these things.
That was the idea, because in fact what you said is so true, because it was inspired, as far as I was concerned, by a friend of mine who said, I've never seen a kingfisher. And I said, well, if we walk down to the canal now, we can cross a bridge, you know, 10 minutes from where we're sitting at the moment, and I'll show you a kingfisher.
Yeah.
And she said, how did you do that? And I said, it's just knowing where to look. It's just knowing what to listen out for. It's knowing where to look. You hear that this really sharp chicky call. Yep. And then you look along the line of the water. You look quite low, and it looks like a dying radar trace. You know, it leaves an after image behind it as it goes up the stream. And it's just absolutely what you said. Just give people a snippet, and suddenly the world becomes a different place.
Yes. Yeah. And it's funny actually, because on the infinitely tedious world of social media, which I know you're not a huge fan of, you don't really do a lot of it, which is probably a good thing in today's world. I do too much of it, I think, sometimes, whether that's making YouTube videos, you know, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. You can just get wrapped up in this social media bubble, you know, and forget the natural world almost. So I do try and manage my time a bit more. But one thing I did very briefly dip my toe into were what's known as shorts, which are obviously, you know, short video of a minute. And obviously that's the whole basis around something like TikTok. And then YouTube introduced shorts, and I tried. This is relevant, I promise you. They did introduce shorts on YouTube, and I started thinking, okay, well, this is a slightly different stream to YouTube. It's a good way of, you know, maybe a minute to describe something. And actually, people watching this probably won't be too pleased to hear this, but you know, I very quickly stopped, because what I found was, you try explaining lesser celandine in 1 minute, even just one plant, you know, and it's exactly as you said when you were saying it. Then I was thinking, yeah, do you know what? That's why I'd not consciously stopped deliberately, but you know, just trying to explain one thing. It's so hard to give the information you want to give, to do that plant or that animal justice.
Well, you have to self-edit, and I found, I mean, for example, lesser celandine, one of the nice things about lesser celandine is that it used to be known as pilewort, because it has these very suggestively shaped roots, and it was used in the days of the doctrine of signatures, when people believed that God had put divine signs in living things, which would help us use them. They'd say, oh, piles must be good for piles. It wasn't, of course, but that's the sort of fact I'd mention straight away, because it's attention grabbing.
That's right, yeah. And obviously William Wordsworth's favourite flower, wasn't it?
It was, yes, and they got the wrong one on his grave as well.
Did they?
They put the greater celandine, which is nothing like it. So that's that. If you go up to Grasmere, you will find that actually
I'll put
the
a clip
wrong
in, 'cause you've got some
celandine.
at the bottom
I've
of
got
the garden,
lots of
haven't you?
greater celandine up the garden. Yes, yes, my glasses are hiding amongst them at some point somewhere.
So you said, yeah. Yeah, so maybe we'll try and find those in a little while, but without treading on them. Yeah, so obviously Tweet of the Day, fantastic success. So the first one, did you say, was 2014?
I think it was 2014, yes. I think it was May 2014. I hope I've got that right, and it wasn't May 2013.
It's okay if you
Actually,
do,
no, I think it is May 2013.
Yeah,
it was.
Yeah.
It was May the 6th, and it was the cuckoo.
Right, yeah.
And we did it because it was Dawn Chorus Day that day.
And of course, I've just been speaking to your good friend, Professor Chris Baines, about Dawn Chorus Day.
Yes, because he inspired it, I think.
Obviously, yeah. I think it was, well, it's in the interview I've just done with him about the full reasoning behind it, but a lovely idea, and one that's obviously now known as International Dawn Chorus Day, which, you know, and who was saying, I think this year he did a piece with RTE, you know, the Irish television company who now follow the Dawn Chorus from
around the world,
India,
yes.
you know, as it comes westward back.
You know,
to
we took
Dublin.
part in that. In fact, it was the longest broadcast I ever did. We linked up with the RTE,
Yeah.
and I was out on the Somerset Levels, I think between midnight and 7:30,
Wow.
and we just kept going.
Yeah.
So we had lots of guests, and it was great fun to do. They said, we need a musician to work with you because we want somebody who can talk about and they got Charlotte Church, and then she suddenly realised, I think she probably realised what the hours were. No, I think she was busy.
Yeah.
And so I ended up working with Will Young on it, and I remember sitting in a hide in the middle of the Somerset Levels at midnight thinking, I'm sending Will Young out now to listen to a bit, and what is going on? What happened? And he was great. He was really enthusiastic and really good fun to work with as well.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things you do. One of the things about doing wildlife broadcasting is you don't expect to meet celebrities, really, generally speaking.
No,
I'm not
that's
dissing wildlife people. I mean,
No,
there are
no,
celebrities
no,
there.
that's right.
But it's more about people with, I suppose, people with a passion.
That's right.
I'm a bit worried about that word, but people with an enthusiasm for the natural world.
Yeah.
And the ones I know tend to put that first.
Yes. Yeah.
But a lot of celebrities would say that, wouldn't they? Whatever their interest.
Well, yeah. Yes, no, very true. Well, if it's okay with you, I'd like to go back a little way to the formation of it all. So what were some of the moments that really, you know, triggered your interest in the natural world?
I don't know. That's a question. It's really difficult to ask because it's more than an interest. It became something. I can remember. I think I was told by my parents that I knew the names of all the flowers in the garden by the time I was 3 or 4, and then I knew their Latin names by the time I was sort of 7 or 8. And
was that their fault or just your?
I think they encouraged it.
Pure inquisitiveness.
They encouraged it, and it was. And at school, we had nature tables as well.
Yes,
so actually, you were always liking nature wasn't considered a. There were fewer distractions, so liking nature wasn't considered a obscure thing then, I think. So they encouraged it. My grandparents were both very keen horticulturists. They were both keen gardeners. My one set of grandparents, mum's parents, had a council house, and it was a greenhouse and a small garden. But I used to love potting up the snapdragons and the lobelia and the little Dorrit. And you'd plant out a white one here, then a blue one there, and a white one here, and a blue. Anathema to me now, but at the time it was growing things that I was excited by.
Yeah.
And my other grandparents had a big garden, and they had rose trellises and big lawns, and I remember my grandfather holding me up to look into a goldfinch nest, and he called them tailor birds, and I'd never heard that before.
Really?
Because apparently they've got the white tips to the feathers on the back look like stitches. I think he made it up.
Oh right.
But I told Richard maybe, and it ended up in Birds Britannica, so he's gone down in history.
Yeah. Wow.
So I think I was encouraged, but I used to lie underneath. We had a weeping willow on the lawn. I used to lie underneath this weeping willow when I was about 5 or 6, and occasionally amongst the leaves I'd see this great big fat caterpillar, and it would be I now know it would be a poplar hawk or an eyed hawk moth caterpillar, and it was bigger than my fingers at the time, great big fat thing, and it had this what was called counter shading, which I didn't understand then, which allowed it to blend in to the willow leaves. And then I remember going to a bit of waste ground down the road, and I found this creature that I didn't know whether it was a reptile or an insect or what, and it turned out to be an elephant hawk moth larva. You know those, and you touch them, and they're like the silkiest of kid gloves. They're just beautiful.
Yeah.
So I think things like that. I found myself falling deeper and deeper, and the seduction just got worse and worse
Just a
as I got
general
older.
immersion.
And then immersion, and then I realised there was just so much to learn. So I just wanted to know more and see more. It was a gradual. It turned from just somebody being keen on something to
Yeah.
being an absolute life force.
Yes,
And I think during the last few years when things have been a bit difficult, you know, for COVID and for family reasons as well, natural history's kept me going. I know that I can go out and get an enormous... I mean, when the swifts fly over here, which they will tonight, we've got the swifts on. I had 2 ravens go over today. Something in me lifts. Yes, obviously friends and family are important.
Yes.
But there's something a bit special about these things that are other.
That's right. Yeah.
We influence them, but actually most of the time they just get on with it. And just to sit back and watch and observe them doing their stuff, I think is a huge privilege.
That's
and
right.
if you can make sense of what they're doing, or at least part of what they're doing, that just enriches life, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, it is fascinating, and animal behaviour is a whole topic in itself, you know, that we don't have time to explore fully today, but I'd like to touch on some elements of it. Case in point,
Yep.
the little
We've got a salvia here.
salvia here, yeah.
We've got a salvia in the garden here, and
and just while we've been sat here,
yeah, while I've been sat here, it's been visited by bumblebees. What interests me, bumblebees don't live very long. Worker bumblebees will live, what, a couple of months maximum, maybe a few weeks only. And yet they've all learned to trick. How do they do it? These salvias are, the flowers, they're pink and they're too small for a bumblebee to get into. The bumblebee cannot force its way into the salvia flower. So what it does, it goes to the back of the flower and it finds out where the nectaries are at the base of the flower tube, and it sucks out the nectar. So they're robbing. It's basically klepto-pollination, if you like, except it's not pollination. Because what they should be doing, what the flower evolved to do, was the bee would go in through, or the insect would go in through the mouth, and it wouldn't be a bumblebee, it would be a much smaller insect, would go in through the mouth, and the stamens would, as it pressed down on the lip, like on a snapdragon, the stamens would then leave their pollen on the back of the bee, and the bee would go off and go to another flower and transfer the pollen to the stamens of another flower. Well, of course, by robbing the flower like this, they don't need to go anywhere near the stamens.
No.
What interests me is how quickly they learn. How do they know how to rob? When does the first one of the new season, but who's never... will only ever see one season or part of it. How do they know where to go on the flower? Is this being passed along hereditarily? In other words, is it a genetic thing?
Yeah.
Darwin, I think, thought it was. So here we are. I've got one of Darwin's conundrums within 2 paces of my back door. And it's just questions like that I really like. The other thing is, if the flower is getting nothing out of it, are the flowers adapting in any way?
Yeah.
Are they going to grow shorter flower tubes to accommodate? Do they open wider, or do they make the?
So this is obviously a non-native species.
It's a non-native species. This one. There we are. There's one coming in there.
Yeah, and we've seen them going in and literally just, you know, sticking
their tongue in
down
and
the side,
having a good drink, and then moving on to the next flower while not doing any pollination service.
Well, I mean, does that? Obviously, you will have thought this, but I don't know where this specific plant would originate from.
This is North America. This is a sort of a South North American salvia. This one.
So, are the insects over there and are the bees? Are they pollinating them properly, or do you think there's a case of?
No, I think what's happening. I think
for them to spread in the wild. I mean,
is that these flowers have adapted. They're obviously not adapted to British insects because we put them into our gardens.
Yeah.
But it does. The same thing happens with native British flowers as well.
Of course.
So what's happening is that a smaller bee, a solitary bee, for example, can get in there and out very easily. So we have red mason bees here, which are very, very efficient. Osmia, very efficient pollinators. They go into the flowers and out again. So that keeps the salvia happy and it keeps the bees happy. What the bumblebees are doing is showing an adapted behaviour, which is allowing them to rob and get nectar sources from a plant which would normally not be available to them. And that's what's exciting. And what I want to know, and I think what Darwin was interested in, is the plant fighting back? Is it evolving defences? And there is a suggestion, I think, with some flowers that they're losing hairs. So they're making themselves more slippery, and so the bees don't hang on so easily. But these things happen gradually, and the bees learn very fast. So this plant could, if it relied just on bumblebees, it would become extinct.
Yes.
But it isn't. Right. It isn't just reliant on bumblebees. But I love these questions. I don't know the answers to them. I wish I did, but I know there are teams of people working on you know, this pollen stealing,
Yes.
as there are teams working on lots of quandaries in nature, and I find that just immensely exciting.
Oh, yeah.
And not knowing is quite exciting, because if we
Yeah.
knew everything, life could be very dull.
Well, it's a journey, isn't it? We're always learning. I think there's an eagerness to learn whatever age you are. It never stops, does it? You know.
No.
One thing I found fascinating, and I became slightly obsessed with, in my own garden in my previous house, was the life cycle of the orange tip, my absolute favourite butterfly. And I initially found a small clump of garlic mustard down at the bottom of the garden, right in the back corner, right in just some horrible clay, slaty soil where somebody tipped a barrel load of plum slate on top of the soil, ripped it out of the corner, broke it up into several clumps in February, stuck it in a few places around the garden, and I couldn't help but want to experiment. So I stuck 5 plants down the east. There was a south-facing garden, so I stuck 5 on the east, 5 on the west, because I was really, really interested in trying to find out whether there was a preference for the females to lay on the morning sun, which is obviously late morning, kind of 11 o'clock, sort of peak time for butterfly laying, isn't it? You know, there through to sort of 2 or 3. I was fascinated in trying to find out whether they would be more interested in laying on that kind of, you know, morning facing sunny border, which was the west hand side of the garden facing east, or whether they'd wait till later in the day because the sun would then be round on the east, you know. And I just became a little bit obsessed.
Did you find out?
I can't for the life of me remember the results, so it's a completely pointless story. But what I'm saying is,
No,
it fascinated
Yeah.
me, because, you know, that sort of behaviour in insects is
and
it changes a lot in a very short space of time.
An orange tip
as well.
is a good subject, because it's the one butterfly I've had a lot of success with here. I planted lady smock. At the moment, it gets very shady at that top of the garden because it's so narrow. But before the leaves come out, it's full of lady smock before everything grows up.
Yes,
and I get orange tips every year since and what I did, I planted hedge mustard, garlic mustard, next door to it, and they lay on the garlic mustard pods. And I've had the entire life cycle take place, and I've watched caterpillars hatch out of pupae that I've left over winter.
Wow.
Which is great. So it's and I know you can get excited about going and seeing lions in the Serengeti or whatever, or orangutans wherever. But there's nothing more exciting than watching the business of metamorphosis actually happen on your doorstep, and know that you were responsible for that happening. It's
well,
a
that's
great
exactly
feeling.
what I did. I watched the caterpillars and I filmed. Well, I when I found the females coming in egg laying, I thought, right, that's it. I'm going to have to film the entire life cycle. So I set myself the challenge of filming all 4 stages. You know, the egg, the larvae themselves, the chrysalis, and then of course the adult butterfly. And I don't know how, but I did it, and I actually found the green form, because of course the orange tip, as you know, has the green and the brown form of the chrysalis. I found a green form of the chrysalis on the base of actually, funnily enough, a recently planted wild privet next door to the garlic mustard. But I know they do, as you have, you know, quite wisely left the stems of the garlic mustard, and they do pupate a lot on the base of those stems. But this one was on the base of the wild privet, and I was just fascinated because I managed to somehow, it was probably on a weekend, between working all over the country, I somehow filmed it emerging from the chrysalis on that very day. And then I watched it was a male that emerged, and it hung around the garden for a day. So of course, as soon as it emerged, clouded over, went miserable, started drizzling. It stayed in the garden for about 2 days, I think, you know, just occasionally going from honesty flower to honesty flower when it could muster up enough energy. But it was fascinating, and I think when you witness something, it's actually the first video that I published on the YouTube channel a couple of years ago, because it was, for me, it was just, I was just, you know, intoxicated with it. And I think if you witness something like that in your own garden, and as you've just said, as a direct result of something you've done to try and attract a certain species, and when it does pay off, you just want to cartwheel down the garden, don't you? You think, I've done it, you know.
Well, I think what's nice about it is that you've unlocked the secret of that particular creature. So to do the best for it, you can be indiscriminate and just see what turns up. Or you can actually say, I'm going to create the conditions because I know what this thing likes. I know that orange tip butterflies wander about They're not. They don't stay put in one area for very long at all. They're real nomadic, and the males will travel ages. Just you can see them flying along roads and hedges, as you know. Yeah, terrible to film. But I only used to get them occasionally, and they just fly through. And I thought I want to see these more regularly. So what I did, I put the plants in, and it worked. Things like speckled woods. I knew that speckled woods, if I mowed the lawn, I mean fat chance, but if I mowed the lawn regularly, I wouldn't get speckled woods. I've got to leave part of it to grow up so the caterpillars can feed in the tussocks of grass that form and overwinter it. That's the important thing, is to overwinter in those tussocks. So I did that and it worked. And also then I wanted, you know, going back to dapple shade, I wanted the right sort of gladiatorial arenas for the males to spar in. And so I've created a little clearing at the top of the garden which gets the sun most of the day at different points. And they use the leaves like little lookouts, and they joust with each other and go up into the air. You know what they do with speckled woods?
Yes, that's it,
And they fly round and round each other, and then one comes
like when
down.
you see a small tortoiseshell, a pair of small tortoiseshells sparring.
They spiral.
And they just go up and up and up and up, and they just go until they vanish, don't
and
they?
These aerial dogfights are about territory most of the time. But with the speckled woods, it's just great, because when you know what they want, you can provide something for them.
That's right.
And I think the secret is not to try and do everything, especially if you've only got a small garden like me, but just to cater for the things that are going to be easiest to cater for, that fit in with your garden plans as well. You know, it's not all about creating complete wildernesses, is it?
And that's the thing, I think, is it's creating those, as I've just been speaking to Chris about, you know, those mosaics of habitats, because that's where you will get the most diversity. You know, we're all too familiar, and we'll come on to some of your previous discoveries on your local patches in a moment, but you know, we're all too familiar with insect declines and the wider landscape becoming a gradually more barren place. Not in all instances, but you know.
Chris Payne's actually very much influenced my views on gardens, obviously, like he has a lot of people. But I remember him saying once, he said, it's all right you having small tortoiseshells on your buddleia. It's all right planting buddleia, but actually for you to get small tortoiseshells in your garden, or for you to have a sparrowhawk visiting your bird table, somebody's got to have nettles in the area. Somebody, whether it's the council or a local landowner, has got to allow enough nettles for the larvae to feed on. Somebody's got to have big trees for the sparrowhawk to nest in. Our gardens are only part of the picture.
That's right.
And it is this connectivity, I think, which is so important. And people, I'm not sure that's talked about quite enough.
No. I did talk to Chris a little bit about this. Well, quite a lot actually. But
he's very good on that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I sort of said to him, well, it's like if you have a garden for a hedgehog that's perfect, and then it goes out into the street and hits a load of walls and concrete gravel boards and everything else, it's almost a pointless exercise, because it can then only remain within that garden. You know, so it's such an important point to have this connectivity, you know, a mosaic of habitats, and a sort of a tapestry across the countryside for connectivity and corridors. You know,
if I may, I mean, I've just written an article for British Wildlife magazine about this. What surprised me is it's hardly a woodland. There's a couple of native trees and a hazel hedge at the top of the garden, and it is fairly enclosed. There's a dappled area, but I've had an extraordinary variety of woodland insects. So one of the insects that's turned up regularly is a beautiful scarlet weevil with a black, almost like little giraffe neck, and this is the hazel leaf roller.
Oh, wow.
And it makes little fat Winston Churchill cigars out of hazel leaves, and it rolls them, you know, ready, and it arrives on
I
there.
thought you were going to say smoke them.
well, they do. You know, it makes these little spliffs, if you like, out of the hazel leaves, and inside it lays its egg, and the larvae grows up in its own little chamber and nibbles away.
So now a bit like solitary bees, but obviously it's making its
but this
own
is
chamber.
A weevil, so this is a woodland species. What's it doing here in the middle of Stourbridge? I don't know of any other sites nearby where it is. One day a white admiral butterfly came and cruised round the pond. Now they do move about in hot weather, I know that. They've got to find new sites. But you know, that was like the ultimate seal of approval, I think. I've got this right. But I've had a rare woodland cranefly, I've had a couple of robber flies, which are woodland species. One of them is very much a ancient woodland edge species. Turn up here, I've had a canopid fly. Now these are amazing things, canopids. Have you ever seen bumblebees sit about looking a bit drowsy in the evening and not flying off? And you find them in the morning covered in dew? Well, they could be on their way out, but there's something a lot more sinister going on. There's a series of flies called canopid flies, which they almost have corkscrew bottoms. They've got a really strong muscular plates on their abdomen, and what they do, they will sit about on flowers looking very innocent, and if you watch them, they're monitoring all the bees coming and going, bumblebees and solitary bees or whatever, and depending on the species, they'll choose their moment, grab the bee, and they force themselves between the end of their body between the abdominal plates of the bee with this sort of corkscrew, and they lay an egg there.
Wow.
And inside, the egg develops and it starts to manipulate the behaviour of the bee. The maggot starts to feed first of all on the non-essential organs, the fats the bee's laid down, but eventually it's because it takes longer to grow, it doesn't want the bee to go too fast, so it slows it down by keeping it out at night. And the bee slowly, gradually begins to lose weight and fitness, but it doesn't want to kill it because it wants to keep the bee moving until it's got to the right stage, and then it goes through the thorax and into the head. God. But before that, it makes the bee bury itself as well, so that it's protected.
Really?
So these are canopid flies, and I found it, anyway, that was a long way of saying there's one that is associated with hornets and wasps.
Oh, right.
And the hornet one, because hornets are increasing, turned up in the garden twice here.
Really?
Now that's an ancient woodland species. What's it doing in Stourbridge?
Yeah.
In urban Stourbridge, and this is what fascinates me.
Yeah.
So we know about the traditional garden insects, things we can expect, but actually, when you go a little bit deeper, you'd be surprised some of the things turning up are really, really unexpected. So our gardens are like well, they're like bus stops, aren't they, on the way to the terminus? And so if we can help insects, even if you've got to stop over here for a few hours in your garden and then they move on to the next bit of woodland, you are providing them with these lovely little service stations
like a
on
platform,
route.
isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's really exciting, and it's not something I hear enough about perhaps in the gardening books.
Yes,
I'm sure you think about it as a designer,
Yeah, well, I mean, I was only saying to Chris, it's not quite the same, a little bit further afield, but one thing I'm aiming to create with the YouTube channel in particular is, apart from being a go-to place where people can find out obviously fascinating facts like you've just told me, even though they are a bit gruesome, but then we know how gruesome the natural world can be, but also to try and get people to recreate habitats on a global scale, because as Chris was rightly saying, it's not enough for us nowadays at the point we are with everything that's going on with the natural world to think, well, my garden's good for wildlife, that's it. We need to be thinking bigger picture, and part of that is obviously creating more habitats around the world for different species. Now, I'm not saying that the fly you've just just mentioned is going to turn up in someone's garden that's watching this in Asia or South America or somewhere, but even just from doing the videos I've done, as I said to Chris, I've had over 150 emails from people that have emailed in. I did ask them to; it wasn't just a random thing, saying that they've created a wildlife pond based on some of the instructional videos that I've done on the channel. So, although that's not quite creating the localized connectivity, it's the fact that there's now at least 150 more ponds throughout the world is a really good way for me to be able to push the message of conservation, not just to this country, but to others as well. And I know that's, like I say, a bit further afield, but it's vital to be thinking globally.
It also demonstrates how mobile some of these insects are. When I dug that pond, I think there was a southern hawker dragonfly laying eggs in it the next day.
Oh yeah.
And the great thing is that some insects are very demanding. So if some of the butterflies, like Adonis blue, for example, depend on metapopulations. They're very restricted in their habitat because their food plant is restricted. Others are great wanderers. Other insects are great wanderers, and things like southern hawkers, the big green and black dragonflies.
We had one just emerging from Chris's pond today. Yeah.
Well, those are wanderers, and they're opportunists, and their whole strategy in life is to say, hang on, we'll go over there, and if they can find a garden pond and just lay lots of eggs in, and then move on to another one and lay lots of eggs in that, some of them won't have any fish in, and some of them will give them a good living, and they stand more chance of maximising the amount of new dragonflies there are. That's what's exciting about it. So in a garden, I think probably if you've got a small garden, you're catering more for the opportunist than you are for the permanent resident a lot of the times.
Yeah.
But of course the permanent residents, like I mean, just in that alcove up there on the edge of the house, there's a nest of tree bumblebees. They may have died out now because they're very short-lived, but those have been in. I know I've got bumblebees in different places in the garden, so there are residents.
Yes.
But there are also a huge amounts of vagrants and transients and passers-by, and those are really exciting.
Yeah. Well, it's like things like I know we're digressing slightly, but it's all relevant. No, it's fascinating. So things like the small blue butterfly, smallest butterfly in the UK, yet apparently, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure I read somewhere the females can sense the larval food plant from 10 kilometres away, which it's phenomenal when you think about the size of this insect and the capabilities it has. It's just incredible, and they are very good at. I know they're very sedentary in the majority of their lives, but obviously you get a very gravid female, they're going to be looking for new sites, as with any.
Well, we do. That's why I had the white admiral here. I did look it up because I associated them with older woodlands where honeysuckle was growing.
Yeah.
But apparently, in hot weather, they obviously disperse. If populations build up, they disperse and try and find new habitats.
And do you think that's maybe
that's what
looking to lay on different varieties of honeysuckle in local gardens?
I think it basically just saw some trees and there was a pond or whatever, and just came and circled round a little bit and then went off to who knows where. They do breed in nearby woods and they are increasing. So that's an example of a creature that has which surprised me, to say the least. But there are other things, like we've got scarlet tigers now, and I know you've seen one earlier this afternoon at Chris's. When I was growing up, actually 20 years ago, 15 years ago even, scarlet tigers were unheard of here. Never heard of them at all. Now I get them every year.
Really?
And they're on the comfrey. They breed on the comfrey. The evergreen olcanet, green olcanet, whatever you call it, they breed on that as well.
Wow,
but the caterpillars will feed on almost anything. And we think that's a climate change issue. And they look like very flamboyant butterflies, don't they?
Well, I said to Chris, it's almost like we'd entered into a tropical glasshouse.
They are really
floating around the pond. Unbelievable.
So that again is something that I've seen arrive. And I know they breed in my garden, but I know that the adults don't stick around here because, for a lot of us with small gardens, they're not boundaries. No. They're moving on to the next one, but they've used you for a season or whatever, and then they move on to something else. I think that's quite exciting that you've given sustenance to a beautiful creature like that.
Yeah. Well, so you mentioned your childhood. I mean, if I may, I was listening to some of the nature diaries that you'd done, and it was fascinating to hear of the changes to the landscape within your local patch, because obviously you lived in this area for many years, and it was really. I listened to the one where you'd been out and you used to get windchat, turtle dove, cuckoo on some of the sort of grassy, scrubby slopes, and then you went back and revisited, and 40 years later you had basically a population of hawthorns. Yeah,
that's happening. It's not very far from here, and I still go back there now. It's privately owned. In fact, the field next to it still has the hawthorns, but of course the birds have gone for different reasons. They were crowded out. But yes, I can remember going there one morning, and I think in my diary, because I used to write everything down with my trusty sort of platinum pen or whatever it was, dipping ink, cartridges and everything, get blue fingers. And I used to write on the page of these notebooks. It was useful. I don't know why I kept a diary then. I think it's just because I wanted to remind myself of what I was seeing. It was a way of remembering.
You're glad now you did.
Well, you know what Mae West said? She'll always keep a diary, and one day it will keep you.
Yeah.
So it was, and Oscar Wilde said, didn't he? That, I always keep a diary. One should have something sensational to read on the train. So it was in that spirit, really. I just wanted to keep a note of what I saw, because one day I thought this might be useful to see whether things were declining or not. So I remember going out that day, and I can remember finding the windchat's nest, watching them back to it, and they reared young that year. Turtle doves were purring just across the valley, and cuckoos were regular every year. And I noted it, but not because I thought it was anything unusual. I noted it because it was worth noting.
Yeah.
Well, of course, I haven't seen a cuckoo on my local patch now for 5 years.
Wow.
Turtle doves went a long time ago. My last turtle dove record was in 1991, and that was from my house window in the valley below. I didn't live here then.
Wow.
In the river valley below. And when I look back at the collective, look back through the diaries, and I've still got them. They go back to 1975, and some of them are falling apart now. It's quite frightening to see what's gone. On the other hand, just before you came this morning, I walked up the garden and I heard this cronk, and a raven soared over the house.
Wow.
Now, I would have wet myself if you told me I was going to see a raven, because I can remember the first raven I saw in Worcestershire was 1981. I was, what was I, 21 then?
Wow.
And I couldn't believe that I'd seen a raven. I was very, very excited. And this was the beginning of the lack of persecution, and they began to come back. Buzzards came back at the same time. So now I can sit in this garden in 2022, and I can, in a day, certainly in a week, I can have several buzzards, raven, peregrine regularly. Peregrine come over regularly.
Wow.
And red kites sailing over because of the reintroductions. I mean, I wouldn't dream of that. I used to have to go to Cornwall or Wales or whatever to see those. So it's not all bad. Things change.
No, it's not.
But of course it's bad for some things like the turtle dove.
Yes, yeah, and then you mentioned about the buzzards and the red kites. It's certainly something that I've witnessed an increase of, even in the last 20 years in South Lincolnshire, just coming over the town. I'd have to go deeper into the countryside to see a buzzard. Now it's just a daily occurrence, along with the red kites, and they are doing very well.
You probably know about something called shifting baseline syndrome, do you?
I've heard it mentioned. I don't know much about it.
Well, it affects all of us because it's one of those things. If you're an older person, we only remember the creatures that we're familiar with, and so the baseline is what we remember in our lifetimes. I've got a friend who's in his late 80s now, and he tells me very fondly of corncrakes keeping him awake in the Severn Valley. Wow. When he first arrived here. So in his 20s or 30s, he was hearing corncrakes. I mean, that's just a myth to me now. I hear people tell me about redback shrikes and wrynecks that used to breed in the county. But I also know that when I talk to birders in their 20s now who are starting out, and I say, well, of course, I can remember flocks of several hundred tree sparrow in these fields, and they go, no. And I said, So that shifting baseline syndrome, we only relate to what we know. And the important thing is that, and I'm glad you're doing these recordings with different people, because the important thing is we get things on the record. We're not making things up. These are not records in dusty old notebooks. There are people alive, old fogies like me, who can actually tell you that they were around. These things were around, and I know they're around because I wrote them down. Some of them weren't around, and I know they weren't around then. I wrote them down, and I can tell you when I saw my first raven, I think it went down in capital letters and red ink because it was so special. Today I walked out and two of them flew over, and it doesn't diminish the excitement. I still loved seeing them.
I must admit, it does something to me every time I hear that. It's just.
Do you have them near you?
Incredible. I do see them. I see them in Lincolnshire when I'm back that way.
So they've come back.
I see them occasionally. Do I see them in Essex? Not very often. There are one or two pairs. I think they're almost in every county now, aren't they? So I know they are about, but every time I hear it, it's just like drop what you're doing and listen. It's just fantastic.
I had a red kite fly over last week, and I can remember spending a lot of money on fuel, not as much as I would nowadays, but going to the central Wales valleys, to the Elan Valley, and finding a single red kite, and it was worth going all the way over to get a glimpse of one of these beautiful birds soaring over a bracken-covered hillside in winter. Little did I know I'd be able to step outside my back door, bowl of cereal in hand, and watch one float over. I still find that slightly incredible. But I know also that when I see a spotted flycatcher, which I did the other day, and Stephen Moss and I were watching it together. It was the first one either of us had seen this year, and that was only yesterday.
Wow.
Now that's unthinkable. They used to be in most people's gardens.
Chris said exactly the same. I'm not just saying that. It's exactly the same thing today. You could see, even I remember.
But I know the danger is to dismiss us as, well, they're just old naturalists, they need to move on. And we are moving on.
Yeah.
But it doesn't stop us thinking there's a reason for this.
Yeah.
And we have to try and tackle the reason for that. It's easy to bring red kites back. Not that it was one of the best conservation success stories of recent years, I think, in this country. When I say it's easy, I'm not denigrating the efforts of people who did it, because there was a huge amount of work and research and insight. The reason it was relatively easy was because the food was there. They're carrion eaters mainly. The habitat is there. For things like the turtle dove, we've got a far more difficult set of issues going on. You know, it involves persecution, it involves change in their winter habitat, it involves change on the journey, the Sahara's getting longer, it involves what happens to them when they cross the Mediterranean, and it involves the quality of food that they get in a changing agricultural landscape here in the UK. That's a difficult one to solve, and it's
you know, it's something that I was thinking about a lot. I mean, I've just been in France for 10 days, and I cannot. I mean, I saw at least 15, 16 turtle doves, you know, and they were almost always in pairs. One field, actually, I nearly fell over because we were driving through the countryside, not expecting it. I sort of anchored on the brakes, obviously checked my rearview mirror first, and I turned to my left, and there were 4 turtle doves sat in the field, and just to the right of them, by about 200 yards, were 2 separate pairs of stone curlew.
Wow.
And I just thought,
another world.
Where is this place? You know, what's happened?
It
is.
And
I you know, it's easy to fantasize about somewhere you don't live, isn't it? You know, the world beyond your doorstep. But I noticed and I heard cuckoos in nearly every valley I went through. You know, wood warblers, golden oriole, hoopoe, turtle dove, nightingales are like song thrushes over there, you know, and it really got me thinking about, you know, the lack of, and I think, I'm not saying this is the only reason, and obviously you've touched on a few very valid points with migration, overwintering, and everything else, but if they're as far north as France, you know, they've got that far, you know, and one of my biggest concerns is the lack of scrub habitat we now have, you know, throughout the UK. I know obviously here in the West Country there's a lot more, certainly, than the East, where, you know, as a Lincolnshire yellowbelly growing up, it was just, you know, fields of rape and wheat, and that was it. Still is, obviously, but I think it's a lot to do with unmanaged, overgrown, scrubby habitat from that kind of grassy margins of a field.
What you've just said, I mean, what you've just said there is quite interesting, because it isn't always unmanaged. The problem with scrub is that its habitat in flux. It's a bit like heathland. And so actually you do need to manage it, and you need to manage it quite sensitively. And there's a lot of effort required to keeping scrub looking good for birds. Because you can't just let it go.
No, because it will
eventually
just revert to woodland,
it becomes woodland.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if you chop it all down, it takes a long time to develop. So this is where scrub is probably a good component of a much larger area of rewilding.
Yeah.
So if you can have some areas of scrub, or if it's in woodland, some areas of coppice at different stages, you're going to encourage more diversity, obviously.
Yes,
I think it's nowadays you see in modern woodland, commercial woodland, people come in and the trees grow up after a period of years, and then they're clear felled, and then they grow up again, and then they're clear felled.
Yeah.
There's nothing for the in-betweenies, or there is just for a short period, you know, while the trees are growing up. And I think you know, modern practice and the way we use the landscape doesn't always allow for these subtleties at all.
Well, it's
getting better.
It's a case in point in my local woodland in Bournemouth. I've done a few videos on the management of the woods. It's a story for another day, really. But I had, when I was, you know, the last time I heard nightingale up until this year was when I was about 15, so 20 years ago, and they were just in that kind of mid-height tree scrub, you know. It was very dense, a lot of young birch, a lot of hazel, and it was just, I remember going there in the evening and listening to them, just absolutely gorgeous. But of course, as soon as that got taller, they vanished from the area. That's not to say they haven't been back in the woods in different areas, but it was just, to me, they'd gone from the wood. At that point in my life, I just thought, where have they gone? The habitat's changed. Nobody's managing for them. They've vanished. You know.
We had this round here because do you remember in the old days when paintbrushes had wooden handles? There was a company called Harris Brushes, and round here they were based round here, and their woods were grown, so they provided the right sort of timber, hazel and birch and other things of the right thickness for brush handles, and so it's perfect nightingale habitat. So a lot of our nightingales and grasshopper warblers actually were found in Harris brush woodlands. The company started to use plastic and the nightingales disappeared.
Really? Oh wow.
That's not the only reason. I'm not going to blame plastic brush handles, by the way, for the loss of nightingales.
Won't have a law case.
It's a lot more complicated than that. Well, I'm not sure whether the Harris brush works. Don't they exist anymore?
I think they do. Yeah.
But it just shows you that it was the management that favoured them, and in fact the Wildlife Trust Worcestershire Wildlife Trust has taken on at least one of the Harris brush woodlands and is managing it better now. The only problem is with nightingales is that once they've gone from somewhere, because they seem to be almost semi-colonial, they seem to attract each other to nesting sites. It's very difficult to get them back.
Yes.
You're far better off hanging on to nightingales if you possibly can than actually trying to because there's lots of suitable habitat now, I know, but the nightingales aren't coming back. So I'm guessing that fewer of them are actually coming to Britain every year now, because they're shrinking towards the southeast now, aren't they?
That's right. Yeah.
So with those, the only answer to this is knowing. You need to know the biology. You need to know in detail. I know the use of transmitters. Making sure we know where these birds winter and what journeys they're taking is helping us an awful lot. And people like the BTO, British Trust for Ornithology, are doing a huge amount of work to help. But yes,
I played my own little part in that. A couple of years ago, I had found a juvenile cuckoo on the side of the road, which it was when you mentioned about them looking like sparrowhawks.
Yes.
Because that's what I thought it possibly was. I just drove past it on the way to, I think I was in a pond in Colchester actually, and just on a back road in Essex, and I saw this little barred. I thought it was a wood pigeon at first. At distance, just saw it. I thought, oh, it's a shame, dead bird. And as I got past it, I saw the barring on the chest, and I thought, cuckoo or sparrowhawk, and so I turned round at the next available turning point, came back past it, and as I went past it, it just blinked, and I thought, my God, it's still alive. And it was in between the curb and the white line, and it's quite a narrow single carriageway, and there were skip lorries and all sorts going past, and I thought, it's not going to be there when I get back. And luckily enough, I managed to get the two guys I was with at the time to stop the traffic either side of the road.
Brilliant.
Chucked a fleece over it, picked it up, took it back. I rang Nikki up. I said, make sure there's nothing in the bath. She's, what are you talking about? Coming back with this cookie. Anyway, long story short, we raised it for the next 2 to 3 weeks, fed it back. It was exhausted. I don't know whether it just, the food wasn't there, or it had been, flushed from the nest too early by a predator or something.
Wow.
Anyway, got it back to health from leaving. Managed to buy all the live mealworms in Pets at Home, fed it up on that, and it then became a bit of an ornament around the bathroom. I remember even looking up at one point whilst I was having a shower, thinking, "There's a cuckoo sat watching me having a shower." Anyway, that was the only place we could think to keep it safe, and we reared it back to health, got it ringed by the BTO. It was healthy, set it on its way. Never heard anything since, of course, but what an incredible.
That's really good,
thing,
though. Well done. I think that's a fantastic story. And
I wasn't looking for the praise.
No, nobody is.
It's
a great story. The fact you bothered,
cuckoos.
And of course, cuckoos are so scarce.
I
think the latest figure I've heard is over 70% decline in southern England. They're doing better in Scotland, but they're not finding the hosts obviously here. We've simplified the countryside because so there aren't so many large caterpillars of moths and butterflies, which they like. They specialise in. So actually, and they're having trouble en route, and we now know because of the wonderful ringing efforts and transmitter efforts that actually cuckoos are just depends what journey they take. They can go east or west.
That's right. Yeah.
We know it's a complicated picture.
Yes.
And again, solving the cuckoo conundrum is going to be a hard one. The good news is actually I've had more around here. Not on my local patch, but I've had them in local woods more than I've seen before. The other day I had 2 males chasing a red-faced female, and she looked like a little kestrel. They're wonderful.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's a while since I've seen a female.
That's another thing about shifting baseline syndrome, and it's another thing about COVID and not going out much as well, because you actually can get yourself, if you're not careful, into a situation where you think it's all going wrong, things are bad, there's nothing left. And I think you know, people talk about natural history being good for you. If you know too much, it can be bad for you as well, because you see the negative side of it. What you don't miss, what you don't know, but when you do know it, you miss it more.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I got myself into a bit of a phase where I was thinking, oh, there's nothing left. You know, we're all, you know, hell in a handcart. But actually, you know, going out more this time. Now we can get about more and mix and join. I'm a member of lots of groups or whatever. It's not all lost. There are things left. We can turn this around. Whether we will is a different matter, but we can theoretically do it. But it's going to take a lot of hard work and dedication. But there are people out there who are doing it. There are people I greatly admire who are doing the research, and scientists. And so I am slightly more hopeful.
Yeah. I mean, as you say about the research, it reminded me of when I was talking to Sir David Attenborough about it. He said, because I asked him about, you know, has he witnessed any kind of local declines close to, you know, where he lives over the last few decades and things, and he said, you know, it's simply not enough to say, I think. He said, you have to back it up with scientific evidence and all the rest of it, which of course most of us don't have the time or inclination to do. But it's very right, you know. But it's easy for us to get caught up in this fanciful world where everything is viewed through rose-tinted spectacles, isn't it? You know, and our childhood
or whatever
was wonderful.
I don't know what the opposite of rose-tinted spectacles are, or the other way. You know, you actually look through a glass darkly and you see a bad side to this. I'll give you an example here of the science. This year, the streets around here have been alive with sparrows chirping, house sparrows chirping, more than I can ever remember. And I know this because I've been keeping notes.
Yeah.
And there are lots of house sparrows. They've been feeding in this tree above us on aphids or whatever. Now, what I don't know, it's easy for me to say, oh, house sparrows are doing all right. What we do need, though, is something like, you know, there's the BTO Common Bird Census, which they do. I know RSPB do a garden bird watch as well. What you need, though, are the facts. It's no good saying, well, my house sparrows are doing well if somebody else has noticed that they've all disappeared and the colony's just shifted a little bit. I get this with house martins a lot. People say, well, I've got no house martins. But it doesn't mean the population's going down, though actually it is. But it probably means that in that area they've just chosen another place to nest. So, yeah, you're right. David Attenborough's absolutely right, of course, that we need the science and we need the overviews, which are really important. I mean, it has to be done by the right people. It's very easy to jump to conclusions.
Oh yeah, and when you look at a local patch day after day after day, you do get a good idea, however.
But I've watched my local patch for over 40 years, and that programme we did for Radio 4, I was able to say these things have come back. So the buzzard, the raven, hobby are doing really well. The little summer falcon. But the things that are going downhill are corn bunting, one or two left, if that now, yellow wagtail, yellow hammer turtle dove, grey partridge, the familiar suite of birds.
I know you said about lapwings as well.
Oh, lapwings have gone. Lapwings have gone. Curlew have gone. And the sad thing about that is, or maybe the reassuring, it isn't just my patch. My patch is a microcosm of what's happening around the whole country. And or at least lowland farmland, it's happening. And I think one can either get very sad about it, but that can be quite a negative emotion, and it's a bit pointless in the end because it doesn't get you anywhere.
No.
You have to try and record what's there, talk to farmers, talk to landowners, see if they're willing to do that little bit extra. Sometimes, you know, there are some very good farmers out there. There are also some landowners who just are ignorant of what they're doing. I'm not saying they're not willfully destroying wildlife. No. Most of the time, indeed, most of the time they actually like wildlife and want it. It's just that they've got pressures on them. We want cheap food.
That's right.
You know, we're all part of the picture. And so it's not as simple. I don't go around pointing a finger and blaming people generally, because I'm not sure that is terribly helpful.
Well, it doesn't actually help anything, doesn't it? I think the best thing to do.
That doesn't mean to say some people aren't to blame.
No, quite. It doesn't excuse them, does it? But no. Well, I feel it would be wrong of me to go on, since you are known as an author as well, to mention a couple of these wonderful books. So the first one I'd like to talk briefly about, if that's okay, is The Nature of Worcestershire, which is Probably as it says on the tin, I would assume. But, I've not had the pleasure of reading.
You can't get me under the trades descriptions. It's about nature and it's in Worcestershire. Yeah, I wrote that with a very good friend of mine. In our lives, what's really important is to have an influence. And there are certain key people I've met in my life who've really, opened the door a little bit. And one of them is Harry Green. And Harry Green is now in his late 80s. He's still active. He's a member of the Worcestershire. He was president, in fact, of the Worcestershire Wildlife Trust. Wow. One of the founders of the Worcestershire Wildlife Trust. And he asked me if I'd like to help him with this. We used to do a bit on local radio together. Harry's an extraordinary naturalist. He's interested in everything. And he knows so much about much as well. He really is very knowledgeable, and he's got a very inquiring mind. He was president of the British Trust for Ornithology for a while as well. So he asked me if I'd like to help him with this book. When I look at it again, it was part of a series about the counties of Britain. I look at it again, I realise how much we didn't know. It was a bit of a cheek actually to put that out. But when you read,
it's out.
I'm sorry, it's out. It's actually quite rare now because it went out to print many years ago.
It took a while to find this. Sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you have to go through a lot of Oxfam shops.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I enjoyed doing it. It was my first sort of foray into writing. And it was great to be able to write with somebody, somebody who knew a lot more. I was standing on the shoulders of giants in that sense, but I enjoyed doing it. Yeah,
no, it's something I'll have to find the time to read. So that's one of them, and I must applaud you for your efforts because all of the things we've been talking about are obviously you witnessing declines or improvements in certain species in numbers locally because you've spent so long in this area and you've witnessed it all, and I think the documentation of that, whether that be the diaries, whether that be something like this wonderful book, which is The Nature of the a Wildlife Rich Forest in the Heart of Britain, which again is fabulous. You've only got to go to the inside cover,
Yes,
and I think it's very, very important, as we were saying off camera before this. Some of the species in here, which you wouldn't dream of. Some of them that I've never even heard of. It's the documentation, as you say, is a bit.
We're very fortunate
about it.
The book was produced by the Wild Forest Study Group, of which I'm a member, and we wanted to document this extraordinary forest because it lies across two counties, Shropshire and Worcestershire, and there's a brook down the middle called the Dowells Brook, from the Welsh Dwlas, which means dark. And this brook divides the two counties. So what was happening is when people were sending records into their different recording areas, half would go off to Shropshire, half would go off to Worcestershire, and there was no overall picture. So what we wanted to do was say, look, this is what we've got. It's not a how to find book, it's really about the riches of wire. And we had 23 authors on that. I was one of the editors of it. And we're very fortunate in having the experts who are able to help us with that, because there's some extraordinary things in there, and there's quite a lot of technical stuff like lichens. It gets quite technical when you're talking about lichens. Flies can be very, and we've got some great ones, honestly, trust me, some fabulous flies. And so butterflies have been very well studied in wire. We've got like the fritillaries, for example.
Well, I mean, the butterflies of the British Isles are the most documented insects in the entire world, aren't they?
And in wire, we wanted to show that. On the cover, you've got a hawfinch, which is a nice bird to have around, and also the narrow-leaved helleborine orchid, which is this beautiful white orchid, which is very rare in Britain, and this is one of about 2 sites in the Midlands, I think, English Midlands. So when you start delving into wire, you realise that it's actually an ancient landscape. I mean, in the beginning of the 1900s, there was still black grouse lecking there.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's changed a lot. So that gives you an idea of this area, which has been under continuous forest for a long time. Not all those changes have been good. It's been coniferised. The 70s were the dark ages.
It's a good word, that.
When all the conifers grew up, though. Well, the dark ages pushed the fritillaries out.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of work going on to restore wire, but it is within reach of 2 to 3 million people. Birmingham and the Black Country,
Yeah.
within easy reach. And the danger with wire is it's now becoming so popular, and maybe it's the fault of these people who've written this book about it.
Says Brett Westwood here on it.
We have to, yes, but we have to get that balance right. That how do we make sure that the wildlife is well catered for and the people are able to enjoy it? Because we get people, we've got butterfly tourists. I bumped into some people the other day, and they'd come all the way from Cambridge here to see the pearl-bordered fritillaries and the small pearl-bordered fritillaries, and they were staying overnight for a couple of nights in Bewdley, which is the nearest town to Wyre.
I suppose it probably would be the closest destination.
That's what they said, and so we're turning. So wildlife is actually turning into part of the local economy, definitely in Wyre, and the butterflies particularly are becoming economically valuable from that. Not that that's their main reason for existing, but it is nice to know that actually they are bringing people to see them, and they're people who behave responsibly. Woodwhites, we've got a few of them, so there are those. I can remember going down there though and seeing, a dozen high brown fritillaries on a walk. So things have changed a little bit.
Yes, quite.
But it's generally speaking, Wyre is a great place, and we wanted to document it. So this book came our way. Photographs are all taken in Wyre. We have several brilliant photographers who contributed to it. It's absolutely Wyre made, and we've sold about 1,300 copies at £35 a copy, which actually isn't bad for a local book. But it is actually applicable. Some of the arguments here and the stories in there and the wildlife stories are applicable to many woodlands throughout Britain. It's just that every time we keep, have you ever seen lemon slugs and strawberry spiders?
Can't say I have.
Well, I could show you. Come up to Wyre. The lemon slug is the lemon slug is gorgeous. It's a sylph among slugs. It's just a real celebrity. Yeah. You won't find one in your cabbage patches. It's a beautiful canary yellow slug with lavender yellow tentacles.
Oh wow!
And it only feeds like Carluccio. It's a gourmet of mushrooms, and so it only feeds on mushrooms.
Oh wow!
And it lives underground this time of year. And it feeds on the hyphae, the mycelium underground, and then when the fungi fruit in autumn, it comes up above ground. And if you go out on wet nights amongst the carpeted beech leaves, you can find them curled up together, mating. And of course, if you're a slug, everybody's a potential partner because you're hermaphrodite. So that's quite useful. But they're lovely to go, and I get very excited about lemon slugs because they're indicators of ancient woodland. You only ever find them in areas of ancient woodland.
Oh wow!
And that is exciting in itself. You've got a slug which tells you about the history of the place. But we've got the strawberry spider is a big fat, the big fat garden spiders, the orbworms you get. This is as big as that.
Really?
But it's bright orange with little white spots on like a strawberry. It doesn't taste like a strawberry. I don't.
Firsthand.
Very rare. Yeah, very, very rare.
Oh wow.
And only found in a few heathlands in the south of Britain. It's found in Scottish Highlands, in young birch forest or whatever, and it's in the Wyre forest. Now, what does that tell you about? We've got these strange things. We've got a ladybird which is only associated with wood ants. It's called a scarce seven-spot ladybird, and it looks like a little noddy clown car. It's sort of red with these big black blotches on it, and it looks different, somehow different, and it feeds on the aphids which the ants farm near wood ant nests, and it can tuck itself in to avoid being attacked. It's only ever found within a few metres, probably even 2 or 3 metres of a wood ant nest. Now we've got a lot of wood ants in Wyre, and we've got these ladybirds, but they're really scarce across the rest of Britain.
Wow, amazing.
I won't go on, but Wyre
I
is
think I need to come
special.
back and do a separate video with you, and you can take me out into
the
the countryside.
I haven't even talked about the land caddis yet.
No, you haven't.
But those are in there as well. The only caddis fly which has a terrestrial larva, and you have to go out at night looking for those because the females are like big pumped up fleas, and they sit on the leaf litter and they pump out pheromones. And they lure the males in, and the males come skipping, and the females are flightless, and the males come skipping in, and they mate with them, and then they die.
Oh wow!
And these live on land. They walk about on land in their cases. Really rare that you're in their heartland here.
Well, I mean, it sounds to me as if we definitely need to do a separate video on some of these amazing creatures because it's a very, very, very wonderful place, and incredible that you've been able to document it because who knows, in 100 years' time, people are like, bloody hell, do you remember when they had the land caddis?
Well, I hope they don't say that. I hope they say, oh, thank goodness they're still here.
Thank goodness for Brett and all the other 20 odd people that wrote this. No, but that's wonderful. So that's one. And obviously, going on from that, I know locally you produce review, which is
every year the Wild Forest Study Group produces a review. This was 2012, and it has a huntsman spider on it. This is the green huntsman, and these are they are wonderful. This is a female green huntsman, and she sits about on young oak leaves when the oaks, but they're quite scarce. So those are in. And what we do with this is we document.
Do you have any common animals here, by the way?
No, we don't have any common animals. What with the council tax we pay? No. What we do have, I think, in Wire is the variety that used to be around before we simplified a lot of our woodlands.
Yes.
And I think the New Forest has the same things. You've got some beautiful ancient woodlands in various parts of the country, and I think the important thing is to recognise they're not just old woods. They are really complex ecosystem full of specialists which are actually been around for thousands and thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah.
So when I hear people saying, well, we're going to have to take down this ancient woodland or these ancient woodlands because of HS2 or whatever, but don't worry, we're going to be planting things up. That's not
it's a myth,
answer.
Isn't it? It's greenwashing.
Well, actually, this is where Chris and I perhaps disagree, because I know he has talked in the past about if we got half-a-mile corridors either side of it, that would be brilliant. Well, it would in one level, but it still doesn't replace ancient woodlands.
No, you can't just stick a new piece of woodland in and it just transform overnight into what it was. You lose all your flora at the ground level, don't you? You know, carpets of wood anemones, bluebells. Well, ancient indicators.
In Lincolnshire, for example, your home county, bluebells are a sign of ancient woodland, aren't they? Here they're not, because it's wetter and it's a different sort of climate, and the countryside is slightly more complicated. But in different parts of the country, some species, like bluebells, it can take them 400 or 500 years to colonise a new woodland, and normally they've got to be quite close to it.
Yeah.
So that's what we mean.
Well, I know, and at times, even like things like the bluebell can take 5 years to germinate from seed.
They can, but think about, sometimes they don't even get into new woodland.
Yeah.
So I think I've got a wild service tree in the garden here.
Yeah.
And that's a tree that if you chop it down, it will sprout again from the roots. And Wire is full of them, and some of the woodlands around here have got a lot in, but they normally are characterise woodlands that are over 500 years old. And so with those species, because they're ancient woodland indicators, that chop them away or get rid of them, plough the wood up, and they go forever.
Yeah.
They're gone. That's it.
We don't have time as a species, I don't think, certainly you'd probably agree, to wait around for another 500,000 years for these habitats to repopulate.
We certainly don't have time, given the pace of other things that are happening, like climate change as well. No, we don't, because things are far from static, and so we can't afford to wait for that. We can't sort of plant our way into biodiversity. It isn't as easy as that. And don't get me started on tree planting. Or would you like to get me started on tree planting?
I've heard your views on it in previous radio.
I am really in favour of tree planting in the right place.
That's right.
And I also, so not on lovely old butterfly-filled meadows. There is an obsession at the moment. We've got a brownfield site not far away, which is absolutely teeming with wildlife. It's mounds of old garden spoil, and there's a new pond in which has been put in there, but dogs walk around, people walk their dogs around it. It looks the antithesis of what should be a healthy old-fashioned nature reserve, and it's full of rare bees, bombardier beetles, they're wonderful, which explode this.
Wow.
We've got those. We've got a huge amount of wasps, solitary wasps, bees, lovely butterflies on there. So the councillors have said, well, we must plant trees, because it's an automatic reaction. And actually, very fortunately, we have a very go-ahead countryside officer who said we don't need to plant trees everywhere, actually, because we want to preserve some of the mosaic of the habitats there. And so he's won over. But I think there is a knee-jerk sometimes to think that planting trees is the panacea. And it doesn't solve all the problems. So I'm not anti-planting trees at all.
No, not at all, no.
All the trees in this neighbourhood, if you look at nearly all of them, are sycamores. and they just sprout. I mean, my garden is full of them. My garden wants to be a forest.
A sycamore tree.
Yeah, it wants to be a forest, and sycamores are very. Most trees don't need planting. Thank you very much. They've been doing it for millions of years. They don't need us.
Yeah.
They don't need a tulip tube and a stake all the time.
Yeah,
Some do, I know, because of deer. But I think we have to sometimes let nature be nature.
Yeah.
We also have to be a little less urgent about results.
Yeah.
So, you know, we don't want everything to be an oak wood tomorrow. We want things. We want scrub. We want transition.
It's that successional regrowth, isn't
Yeah,
it?
and we want to sit back and watch or
Yeah.
whatever. And I'm sure. I think you probably agree with that, don't you?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, it's those, and as Chris has said before, and I completely agree. You know, woodland edge is one of the richest habitats you can get, or woodland clearing.
But if you look at most woodland edges in Britain at the moment, especially in Lowland, it's a sharp one. It's a field and then trees,
crop,
and that's not very good.
No.
What we need is this ecotone. You know, this gradual.
Yeah. It's like planting a herbaceous border, isn't it? You plant your lower ones at the front, you know, and then you go up to your verbenas and things at the back, you know.
One of my favourite books, and you probably, and whether you've read it as well, is by a guy called Ken Thompson. And he's, do you know Ken Thompson?
I know Ken Thompson.
Ken Thompson was one of the brains behind the Sheffield Biodiversity and Urban Gardens project, BUGS.
Oh yes, yeah.
So it's Biodiversity and Urban Gardens in Sheffield, BUGS. And this was done, I think, in the, was it early 90s? And what they did, they wanted to find out what made a garden good for wildlife. And obviously I don't want to tell my grandmother to suck eggs here. But
I'm all open to
one of the things that I was really impressed that came out of that was, yes, you can have a little wildflower meadow, though we actually said there are better ways of attracting wildlife, but you don't have to do it all. But what he said you need is structure. They found from all the gardens they surveyed in Sheffield that the areas which were richest for wildlife had the most structure. So if you've got a lawn with a flat lawn and a patio and maybe a shrub or a few, that's not going to be as good as if you've got a few shrubs. And that's not going to be as good as if you've got a wood pile, or you've got a garden pond, as you know, or if you've got some tree structure. And if it's native tree structure, especially things like, I mean, that's why I put a birch in, rowan, birch, hazel, you will get more out of it. So basically, as many layers you can cram in is best, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And even, he said, even there's sand here between these little paving slabs I've got, and they're full of solitary bees in spring.
Really?
Yeah, they and I have bee flies laying their eggs in them as well. So even hard surfaces, as long as they've got porous bits in, can be good. Not this block paving you see on people's drives, where you pave it all together and all the water runs off, and you put your Range Rover on it or whatever. So other planet destroying vehicles are available.
I've not got a Range Rover, just about
but yes, I think where was I? Yeah, I think we need to understand how nature works, and we need to give it space to work as well. And I did enjoy Ken Thompson. The surveys, the idea of structuring gardens being important means that you can actually do an awful lot. I base my garden on that book in a way, but I should be basing it actually on your book, shouldn't I?
I don't know.
When I get it.
Well, you know, I...
Mizzle thrush. I haven't seen one of those for ages.
Cool, yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. So I'd just like to touch on, if I may, there's a couple more books I'd like you to just briefly talk about. One is Natural Histories and the other one is Woodland. Again, it says a Stephen Moss.
Absolutely, yeah. I can't write books on my own. I have to be propped up by well-known
there you go.
authors.
Okay, tell me a bit about them.
Well, Natural Histories was the book of the series that I did for radio.
Accompanied,
and I think there were 99 programmes in the end, and the idea behind those was that they were cultural histories of how we interact with animals as well, and those were great fun to do. So we've got everything from a mandrill, which was treated like a prince in Georgian times. We've got all sorts of things. We've got beetles, dinosaurs,
I love
butterflies.
listening to the poppy as well. Yeah, I really
the poppy.
One,
Do you know, I've forgotten. I have just forgotten how many we did now, but it was endlessly exciting, and I really enjoyed doing natural histories. So we did a book, and we wrote a little bit about them as well, which I think is now probably a collector's item.
But important nonetheless.
That was great fun. Stephen helped me with that as well.
Good old Stephen. And Wonderland, which is a little different.
Yeah, Wonderland is when we did Tweet of the Day, the publisher of Tweet of the Day, John Murray, who are a scion, if that's the word, of Hachette publishers, the great big publishers. They said, we'd like something that's actually about all British wildlife, not just birds. And so this was born, and we decided to divide it up into each day of the year, a representative thing you could see on that day with a story about it. And this has actually been remarkably successful. I didn't actually, it wasn't over nuts on the title to start with, Wonderland, but I thought actually it sort of sums up how I feel about the natural world. I am filled with wonder, whether I look at the bees robbing the salvias here, you know, or find something weird up the garden. It should go in here. And so Stephen and I wrote half each. We gave people an extra day because it's leap year. Yeah. And we wrote, you know, 180 or 180 odd pieces each. And it was great fun to do, really great fun to do. And it's gone down rather well. And again, it's an exercise in brevity, I suppose, and compactness, because we had a certain number of words we could use for each creature. But I really enjoyed doing it. Chris Packham has called it very kindly on here, a brilliant treasury. And I suppose that's what it was. I'm not saying it was brilliant, but it was certainly a treasury. The idea was you could dip in, a bit like you can with poems, and come out with an unusual fact. We've had a very good reaction to this. I have to say, a lot of people go to their birthday first and find out what's in it. Like, what's your birthday?
26th of October.
26th of October. Oh.
19th.
No, I don't really want to know that. Just the date will be enough. So, what's your beast? I'll give you the first line and you'll get it. Thanks to Lewis Carroll's Mad Hatter's Tea Party, this is probably the best known mammal that sleeps in teapots.
Dormouse.
Yeah, the dormouse. So that was our one for there.
Fantastic.
But the nice thing about it was
you don't want to read the rest to me.
No, I don't. Well, I'd love to actually. In an
I'm
ideal,
not sure
in an ideal world where we weren't hungry and tea wasn't waiting, then yeah. But no, I enjoyed doing this, and again that was an interesting exercise. Stephen said he always jokes. He said all the stuff you've heard about, I've written.
Yes,
and the stuff you've never heard about, Brett did that.
He did mention that
Which
to me
is,
when
I know he
spoke
mentions it to me every time.
and I'm sure he mentioned it to lots of other people too.
But it goes down. Bill Oddie just said this is very good, which actually is probably the best I can.
It's a very good compliment.
It's a good compliment, actually, that is. But I enjoyed writing that, and I enjoyed the idea of surprise.
Yeah.
And also...
Well, once you've signed that copy and handed it over to me, I'd be happy to delve into it. Yeah.
Good. Oh no, it's mine, isn't it? This.
It is. Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
You can get it in paperback. It's still available in paperback. But
Brilliant.
Yes, of course.
No, I'll have to get.
So
a copy.
that was really enjoyable.
Wonderful.
And what it enabled me to do was sort of concentrate on some of my favourite creatures as well.
Yeah.
Which
so
brings
for you,
me to newts.
Newts. Yes, I have a book. If you wouldn't mind, I'd like you to read a small excerpt from. This is The Outdoor World by Furneaux, and this book is from 1893. And there's a small excerpt, if you wouldn't mind, on newts, which I've picked out just for you.
Okay.
Nikki managed to find this book. I mean,
yes, thank you, Nikki. Did you know that newts were one of my favourite top 3 British animals? There,
I happen to know that.
Well, that was very well chosen.
Yeah.
So this is actually from 1893. This is a view of newts,
and it's what I love about this book, and I've not read it all, but what I love about this book is it's the descriptions of things such as the small blue, for example, are mentioned as the Bedford blue.
Bedford blue.
Oh, it's just fantastic. I can't wait to read the rest of it. But yeah, so fire away if you will, please.
Well, there's a bit of fact to start with. So newts or efts, this says. There are but 2 common species of newts in our country, and both of these are more or less known by schoolboys, who speak of them generally as effers or effits. I have also frequently heard them called lizards, especially when they've been seen wandering about on dry land. They are certainly much like lizards in general form, but may always be distinguished from these by the softness and colour of the skin. I have met with many who suppose that newts are never to be seen out of the water, but it is a fact that they spend much more of their existence out of water than they do in it. When on land, however, they always seek cool and shady places, while lizards delight to bask in the hot sun, spreading out their flattened bodies so as to expose a larger surface to his rays. Strange tales have been and are still being told about the venomous and fiery character of newts. Some of our country folk aver that they can spit fire, even immediately on quitting the water. Others tell horrible tales concerning the victims who have succumbed from the effects of their poisonous fangs. And according to the accounts of others, many are the cattle that have been poisoned through drinking the water of ponds and troughs which were inhabited by newts. The country cottager who has lived out his 70 in close proximity to a pond annually frequented by these dreaded amphibians seems to be as ignorant about them as anyone, and on more than one occasion have such individuals looked at me with terror and most earnestly entreated me to desist while I have been engaged in collecting newts, and the fear-stricken countenance has given place to an expression of wonder when, after careful watching, it was observed that the venom had apparently no effect. So newts, yeah, there's a lot of folklore about newts, aren't there? And I love them. I
hope you've enjoyed reading that.
I did enjoy reading that. It's fantastic, isn't it? But it just shows you that back in 1893 there was still a lot of country lore. I still think it is now. You know, we do it now, don't we? When I was a kid, you know those beetles that sit about on hogweed flowers?
Yeah.
The red ones. We used to call them bloodsuckers.
Yeah.
Did you?
Not bloodsuckers, but I know
but they're not
what you mean,
bloodsuckers. But
No.
we always knew those bloodsuckers because they were the right colour. Nowadays we call them hogweed bonking beetles because that's all they do. Whenever you see them, there's always a pair of them, sort of in cop, as we entomologists say.
And as someone once said to me, they're always in threes. There's always an observer.
Yes, well, more than watching sometimes.
Well, quite.
But I think.
Well, no, thank you for
that's
reading
great.
that.
I think that's
wonderful.
lovely, and it. What I like
I just
about
love the description of everything in there. You know,
the fiery character of newts. What I like about that is the. I think it's because they're orange underneath, obviously. But I think what I like is the fact that a small creature which looks bizarre, like a little dragon in the pond, can cause so much mystery and controversy.
Yeah.
And the fear, because we're not frightened of them now. In a way, it's almost better that people notice them than don't notice them at all. And I think what worries me now amongst a lot of people is that they lead such busy lives. They're not as close to nature perhaps as they could be, and the seasons go on and things happen under our noses, and for a lot of us it doesn't have any relevance anymore. We don't have the time for it, and yet we can spend ages watching a documentary about it on television or listening to a podcast, whereas actually
it's on your doorstep.
Well, it's on like the bumblebees robbing things. It's about watching. It's about having the patience. My mother's favourite poem, which we actually read at her funeral, was "What if life is full of care? We have no time to stand and stare." And I know it's a real cliche, but I do think that you don't have to be doing all the time. No. Just absorbing stuff and enjoying it is really productive. Well, for me it is, but maybe I could just be a very, very lazy person.
Well, it's like the other one I know is, life is what happens when you're busy making plans, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's exactly that. You have to take the time to stop. We could all be busy fools for the rest of our lives, but you have to make time for nature, because it is a huge healing resource, I think, for whatever situation anybody is faced with in life. We've all had our own struggles and ups and downs, but the natural world is always there, and it's a great healer.
It's always there, and I think as well, it's a glimpse of that we're not. It's a glimpse of something other. It's a glimpse that we are not. We are not supreme. We are not in control. We actually have to dance to a different drum or whatever. And our lives, in the end, a lot of these things will go on when we're not here. Yeah, let's hope that day doesn't arrive. But when we're not around, the human race has less influence. Wildlife will always be there in some form or other. Yeah. Even though we've managed to eradicate some of it already, it's sturdy stuff, and I think and it's endlessly fascinating, which is why having a garden, it doesn't have to be a big garden, does it? It can be a flower pot or a flower trough, and you can, for example, the bee behaviour we've talked about. You can see that if you've got a flower pot on your doorstep, or you go to your local park. So it's not all about having a big garden. It's about having the right mind that says, that's really interesting. I'm going to follow that up.
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
read a bit more about that.
Well, before we come on to your garden, I'm conscious we're losing the
The
daylight,
light's going, isn't it?
we'll be wanting jackets before long and torches. But there's a couple more things I want to come on to briefly. But one is this wonderful collection, which I've not listened to because they're yours, of
They are
the
available
CD
in
guides,
the wide world.
which you've done. But it's Stephen Moss cropping up again.
We've done a lot together, haven't we? Really, he's a sort of partner in crime. We did a series, a guide to different birds of different habitats. So we did farmland birds, we did woodland birds, we did moorland and mountain birds, water birds, and we did a guide to British garden wildlife.
Fantastic.
And the idea was, it was me and Stephen Moss in conversation, much as we are now, just giving people hints and tips as to what to look and listen for. And they seem to have gone quite well. I think that they were BBC CDs.
Yeah.
But yeah, they were great fun. They went out on Radio 4. They might still be on BBC Sounds.
Oh, brilliant.
It's always worth checking BBC Sounds for natural histories. I think those are on there
yes.
at the moment.
Oh, they are.
But there are two it depends which version, because they've been putting...
Oh, yes.
There's a cut down version,
right,
which has to fit a 22-minute slot. So we did, ours were 28 minutes. 30-minute slots at 28-minute programmes, or 27.50 if you're being really pernickety about it. But yeah, there's a 22-minute version as well. So,
Wonderful,
but those are still available.
Wow.
As his tweet of the
So
day.
for anybody watching,
endlessly.
yes, absolutely. Get yourselves listening to that lot. Years of entertainment. And then finally, before we talk about your wonderful little garden, I would say little, it's quite long, but wonderful little space. I'd like to just touch on your involvement with Springwatch. Obviously,
Okay,
Stephen, obviously, sort of co-founder, if you like.
Yes, it's the one thing, but we haven't been involved in Springwatch together, because
No.
he was doing other things by the time by the time I got involved. It was about it's going to be about 8 or 9 years ago when I first got involved with it, and they said, we'll buy you out of radio, would you come along and be our consultant?
So they dangled a big juicy carrot.
Well, yeah, and they said, identify this. And so my
Carrot
job, I
beetles.
didn't know what my job was at first. We were on location, but I found it fascinating to be part of such a big team. In radio, there were 5 of us producers, but making radio programmes is actually quite a solitary thing. You go off, people say, what does a radio producer do? And the answer is just about everything. So you have the idea, you sort out the guests, the contributors, you arrange for them to either do interviews down the line, or you go to their houses and meet them, much as you've come to my house today. You record it, you book the hire cars, you do the lot. You travel to it, you book the hotels, whatever.
Yeah.
You come back, you edit it all, and then somebody does help, you edit it, and then somebody mixes it for you, and you do the publicity as well. You do a lot. Producers do a lot. So I was brought out of that from this rather solitary occupation into going into a group of over 100 people, maybe 120 people on site working together to make a television series live. And I didn't know what had hit me. It was very strange, and I wandered about on the fringes pointing out obscure grubs and having no perceptible use whatsoever. And eventually they started to say, oh yeah, okay, Brett, you can do a little bit more and a little bit more. And I started to do like a radio version of it, going in very early and talking about what's on
Well,
the
of course,
wildlife
you were known
cameras.
for the red button, weren't you?
And then we did Red Button.
Yeah.
And then I was doing stuff on air, and sometimes it was on BBC too. And I think it got to the stage where I was doing 3 hours a day live.
Wow.
And towards the end, we were having celebrities who'd come on for Unsprung as well later on. And I was talking to them. So you'd show them around the wildlife cameras, people like Sue Perkins and Stephanie Cole and Deborah Meaden and people like that. And it was lovely to find out about their involvement in the natural world. Lovely to meet them. And it was also a very interesting exercise, getting 2 guests who didn't know each other to talk to each other, but also to pick up on whatever was happening live on the camera. So if a red kite brought in a sheep's tail, you'd want to talk about that or whatever, or a buzzard brought in a grass snake or whatever, you'd talk about that. I found that marvellous, really enjoyable.
Yeah.
And we were making, and in between, if anybody got identification queries on films or whatever that were going out, they wanted voiceovers done. I was doing little roundups about what we'd seen.
Yeah.
So you were absolutely busy from the minute you started till 10 o'clock at night. It was they were long days, but it was very enjoyable.
Did you ever walk around with like a bag over your head so no one could identify you?
Well, of course, and then the really nice thing about Springwatch was it was like being part of a travelling group of players, and they all get together for a play. Yeah. And everybody got on really well. There were very few well, there wasn't really any hierarchies. People just cooperated. Yes. I have never been part, ever, of such a brilliant sense of team spirit. People were so friendly, they were helpful, everybody played their role, and it went like clockwork. Now I know some people, the key people, were working very, very hard behind the scenes. My role was minor, relatively, but I really enjoyed it. And to see Springwatch put together, I have heard people, naturalists, in the past, I'd heard people say, oh, it's all about blue tits, and it's, we know and badgers, and we're tired of hearing about it. What they don't realise was that how much work can go into, if you want to estimate the calorific value of a mouthful of looper caterpillars or whatever, somebody's got to get on the phone to the scientists, somebody's got to do that research, and sometimes a line that Chris or Michaela or whoever would say had taken, half a day to research. Yes, and it was all new science. Whenever they did anything, you think, we're going back to that, you learnt something new every time. And I'm not too bad on British wildlife, but Springwatch, taught me so much. There's always some brilliant science on there. So, it was a great learning experience. It was just a fantastic... I made a lot of friends on Springwatch as well. It's really enjoyable. Yeah, no, fantastic. And, something that obviously is a bit of an institution now for the UK, is now. In fact, it's probably on very soon, isn't it, tonight?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Well, before we go and get some food, let's talk a little bit about your garden, because there's some really interesting finds which, before we, film this, you've shown me. Which so one is the wild service, which is wonderful, which is not a tree that obviously I personally come across very often at all, in the wider countryside.
Well, going back to those principles I was telling you about Ken Thompson and the biodiversity and urban gardens in Sheffield, I wanted to get as much structure into a narrow garden as possible. I think possibly maybe 3 people could lie across this garden, and that's all. But it's about 120 feet long in Old Money, so it's long and narrow. And I knew there were limits to what if I wanted.
Well, it's quite challenging, isn't it? Because you can't have like what Chris would describe as the woodland glade, because by the time you put your trees up the side, there's no sunlight in the middle, is there?
So with me, I couldn't have. I have got some tall trees. I've got a birch tree which is getting embarrassingly large now, and that was just. I felt sorry for it, but it was wrenched out of. Birch puts itself about all over the place. It's a good coloniser. So I thought, you've got to come out of there, otherwise the foundations go. In fact, I found a well where it was growing.
Crikey.
There's an old well here. And I stuck it in, and it wilted. And I thought, well, fair enough. It was never.
Was that or the house?
And then that happened, and now look at it. It must be about sort of 15 metres tall easily, isn't it now?
Oh yeah.
And that attracts so much. I had redpolls feeding in it.
Yeah.
I've got a whole range, and a whole range of shield bugs and caterpillars and things on it. I have a beautiful little moth, a woodland moth there called the green longhorn, or is it? I think it's the green long-horned moth. And the males have these stupidly long antennae. They are about 4 times as long, 3 times as long as its body.
Really?
And they're white. And sometimes you look at a birch tree in April, and all you can see are these great big long whiskery filaments.
Either side of the trunk.
Either side. Well, almost, yeah. But appearing up from the leaves, and then when the sun comes out, they do their dance, and the males dance up and down like marionettes.
Oh, well, a bit like
to
ghost
attract
moths.
The females, a bit like ghost moths, but they're only little. These are little moths, and they've got lovely brassy, coppery, greeny wings. And the larvae feed on leaf litter. So that says 2 things. One, I've given them the dancing arena for, and they can do their Strictly Come Dancing on the birch leaves. They've got their platform, but also the hazel hedge I planted has developed a nice leaf litter now, so the larvae live in the dead leaves and in the leaf litter.
So a very good case in point for not being too tidy in the garden.
I mean, not being tidy, if that means not mowing the lawn and not doing much, that's fine by me. But I think it's just shows, you see, if you can cater for both aspects of that moth's lifestyle. I didn't expect it to come in, because it doesn't fly very far. It's a woodland species mainly, but here it is.
Wow.
And
so then
that,
the
that
other
helps.
thing that tree-wise you've got, which really fascinated me, was the
Witty pear.
yes. Well, I've never heard it referenced as a witty pear, but
It's a true service tree. I think you
Yeah.
identified it, didn't you?
yeah, Service
saw-
domestica, isn't it?
Yeah, Sorbus domestica.
Sorbus domestica. Sorry.
Yeah, service is a corruption of
yeah.
sorbus from Latin.
Yeah.
This is a bit like a rowan.
Which I've never seen in the wild. So
No, well, you won't have done, because it's really rare in Britain. And there's
Yeah.
a lovely story about this. It was... Hang on. So this particular... This is a descendant of the original tree, I think, which was found in 1678 in the Wyre Forest,
really,
not far from here. And at the time, it was the only one known in Britain.
wow.
And it was known as unusual tree because it looked like a rowan, but instead of having scarlet berries, small, it carried what looked like little apples or pears.
Oh right.
And it was known locally as the witty pear, and the
Wow.
witty bit meant witches
Mm.
and witchcraft. And the idea was it would ward off witches, and rowan has that folklore attached to
Yes.
it.
Yeah.
So people saw this rowan or whatever, and they came, and there were pilgrimages to it, and people came to look at it because it's known on the continent, but in Britain it was just this one tree. We still don't know how it got there in Wyre. There was a remains of
Wow.
an old cottage nearby, but it was burnt down in 1862 by somebody who had a grievance against the man who owned the land, and
Oh,
this guy
right.
was shipped off this man who didn't like trees was appropriately shipped off to Botany Bay for other misdemeanors in Australia. But cuttings were taken of it. The wood from the dead tree was turned into a goblet, and witty pear wine later was drunk from it. I've seen the goblet that was made from the original tree, but because cuttings were taken and new trees were grown, it was grown at the cathedral. There's one in the cathedral close at Worcester. There are some that turned up at Croom Court just off the M5,
Wow.
which is now a National Trust property, and witty pear has also turned up in the Wyre Forest. It was planted out in one other place, and there's still a tree standing on the spot, which is, two have now replaced one
Oh,
has
brilliant.
replaced the tree that was on the original spot. But there's a twist. So this was the only site for witty pear. Somebody was walking along the cliffs in South Wales in Pembrokeshire, a very good botanist, and he happened to look up, and he noticed that what he thought were rowans, little stunted rowans growing out of the cliff high up, weren't at all. They were witty pear trees, and they'd been there all the time.
Oh wow.
So people started to look. These were not big trees, they were small suckers. People started to look around, and then somebody read an account of a monk called Nennius. And this monk, and I think it was something like the 10th century, he'd written, or the 9th century, and he'd written about an ash tree growing pears on the cliffs above the Wye Valley
Oh wow.
in the River Wye and the Herefordshire border or whatever. And somebody went back there and looked, still there.
Oh brilliant.
So that was, I mean, think about this tree had lain incognito in Britain and suddenly been discovered and this was in the I think it was 1989 or 1990s,
Wow.
that late.
Blimey.
So suddenly we knew that actually this was the witty. It had always been a bit in
Even
doubt.
escaped
It is a
Linnaeus.
native tree. It escaped. Well, it escaped everybody because people just didn't notice it.
Wow.
And if you go over the M5, sorry, the road bridge to Wales, you know, the M48, I think it is,
Yeah.
across, and where the M4 crosses,
Yeah.
just north of there, on the crumbly cliffs up there, is witty pear growing high up on
Wow.
these crumbly shale cliffs, and it's been found in Cornwall now. We'd never looked in the right places for it.
Oh blimey.
So isn't that a great detective
Yeah,
story?
yeah,
I think there's a radio program
Yeah.
there, don't you?
And one just happened
Gotta
to
be.
blow into your garden.
Well, no, I put this was grown as a seed from one of those, so a friend
Fantastic,
gave
yeah.
it to me.
Wow.
But you can, I gather you can make, they've done a lot of genetic analysis of the trees. They went off to Kew, some of the Wyre ones
Oh, yeah,
did, just to
yeah.
find out what its origins were. And it's still, we don't know, it doesn't look like it's one of the native ones. But there are no great big native witty pears as far as I know. They're all fairly edge species, they're literally on
Right.
the edge.
Wow.
But there's a nice story, and I just wanted one in my garden.
Yeah. Well,
Whoever comes in here after me will probably chop it down. But I found one 2 years ago in a garden not far, a big garden of a big house not far from here.
really.
And it was a specimen tree, and you don't often see it grown as a specimen
No.
tree.
No.
So we're trying to do some research into how that came to be there in this Georgian
Oh, right.
garden.
Wow.
But it's just interesting, isn't it? Great story.
Oh yeah. Well, and a great little addition to the garden.
And it's nice in the garden, and it's a native. So that's my native end.
Yeah.
It's a bit like Mordor.
And then past
we don't go too far.
Past that, you've got your hemp agama in your pond.
I've got there's a sort of pond. There are tadpoles in there. There's lots of frogs, but there's a lot of hemp agrimony, which is I grow for butterflies, obviously, and it
peacocks
gets
love it, don't they?
Peacocks love it, and I love peacocks. So smooth newt, peacock, grass snake. Favourite three creatures.
Have you had grass snake in the garden?
No, we're
not this far.
We're
north?
a bit too into town for that, I'm afraid. If I did, I'd probably just fall over in a big faint if I saw a grass snake here, because it would be great. It would be the greatest compliment you could imagine. So I've got to make do with a white admiral.
I'm not trying to make you jealous in any way, shape, or form. But my last house, I put some tins down underneath the bramble. I'd grown a thornless bramble, and with the idea that I wanted to get some slow worms, into the garden. I got grass heaps and everything. I lit one of the best discoveries of my life. Lifted it up one day, and there was this perfect little curled, like a little pencil, little baby grass snake under the tin.
Beautiful.
And I promised I'd not trouser legged it into the garden, and I just stood there going, it's just one of those moments when you never forget.
No, I would. I would consider that a huge compliment. We're a little bit isolated here for that sort of thing. So insects are the things that surprise me.
Well, I mean, I'm sure the viewers would love to hear about your discovery yesterday.
Oh yes, well I showed
you. Yeah,
I'll
put a photo over the top.
Yeah. So I've seen them before, but I came back yesterday, and it was a warmish day, but not too warm. And I saw what I thought was a wasp hovering around one of the flower beds here. Yeah. And I thought that's not quite right. I think that's a clearwing moth. I'm very interested in clearwings because they're very elusive moths. With part of the wing has no scales, but only the tips have scales generally. And
so like the clearwing butterflies in Central America.
But these live in the stems of plants. So this was a currant clearwing, and I think it's in that rather exotic fuchsia flowered currant there.
Oh right.
But you hardly ever see the adults. Normally what you have to use is the females attract the males by sending out pheromones with these invisible plumes of scent which lure them in, and the males come out on hot days when the wind's in the right direction, and they can find them from a long way off. Well, this one actually just appeared, so I took some photographs of it, which we can post. And it's lovely to see. Currant clearing is now a nationally scarce species.
Really?
Or is it just overlooked?
Well, we talked about this earlier, didn't we? I said to you, even something as common as the purple hair streak butterfly, how many people apart from yourself clearly are looking at the tops of oak trees in July. It's
I grew a wych elm once, until last year there was it died obviously because wych elms do, and they get. But there's a man just up the road here and he's got white letter hair streaks in his garden on wych elm.
Wow!
So I grew one and I attracted them in one day, and of course,
fantastic.
Unfortunately, they got Dutch elm disease and the tree died and had to come down. There's a stump left.
I did notice the stump earlier.
But unfortunately, it was in danger of falling onto the neighbour's garden, the tree. So we removed it. But so white letter hair streak has appeared, but very, very briefly.
Yeah, they're very nomadic again, aren't they? They're very good at finding new colonies. I found this in South Lincolnshire and they were actually moving because I don't know why, but bizarre set of circumstances where the hedgerows, a lot of it was English elm, and it was all flailed, so it never got high enough to actually flower. But yet, where the hedgerows went around a certain series of like pull-ins, lay-bys if you like, or along the A16 between sort of Stamford and Spalding, there was a series of lay-bys, and the white letter hair streaks were on these elms that were just an isolated patch. Then it was just hedgerow either side, and then it'd be a mile or two before the next one.
And then there'd be a white
and then when that patch died, they'd move on to the next one down the road. Really, really odd.
Because it is about that concept. I've noticed that even if the slightest bit of disease is on the tree, they won't lay eggs on it.
That's right. Yeah,
it's like they know. I don't know how they do, but they know.
Well, I know they smell through their feet, don't they? Which is incredible.
But they can't just smell the plant. They must smell that something's up with the plant.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's what I find fascinating. Another question I can't answer.
We've got a lot of work to do, haven't we?
Yeah, we've got a lot of work to do.
But coming back to the garden, then we could digress all day, couldn't we? And it's fascinating. I've thoroughly really enjoyed it. But what I think is is important again with this garden, which is wonderful with what you've done, is create a series of habitats. It's not just lawn, trees, or you've got a little bit of mown lawn as a path, because otherwise it's more concrete, isn't it, as a pathway through the middle. But you've got herbaceous borders, so even the non-native plants are providing nectar and pollen. And I mean, the whole time we've been sat here, I mean, it must be getting on for 8 o'clock now, but there's the sound of bees, and they're in the foxgloves, they're in, remind me the name again of this one.
This is a pineapple broom above us.
I knew it was. And they're everywhere through the garden, so it's not just indigenous species of plants to this country that are important.
I don't think we should. I think it is important to plant some indigenous plants.
Absolutely, things
I
like the garlic mustard for your orange tips, but I always try and encourage a mix.
But I think also don't be put. I don't want to be put off planting plants I like as well.
Absolutely.
I tend not to plant double flowers.
Yeah.
Because I want as much nectar to be available
That's
to
right.
plants. And there are some things I can't plant because this garden just seethes with slugs after dark. Actually, so we'd better move, otherwise we were slipping away.
Yeah, I might lose a foot or something.
But I planted something new the other day. I put a Shasta daisy in one of those the marguerites, because I wanted a bit of white over there and cover up the fence. And the slugs and snails thought, hey up, he's put something different in it. It's not got hairy leaves. And I've had to pick them off every night. Now, there's been a bit of conchological redistribution gone on. The neighbours don't seem to mind, I don't think.
Have you asked them?
Well,
Just assumptions.
It's amazing how far they'll travel, actually, and they are narrow gardens. Did I just say that? I didn't say that. I'm only joking, neighbours.
At least you're not cutting them in half.
No, I don't do that. They do go on interesting journeys, I think. I should mark them.
Yeah, that's
see
right.
if they come back.
They do.
They do home.
Yeah, they do
They
home,
do.
don't they? Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Look at these bees. I mean, it's getting dark, and they're still coming in and robbing the flowers.
Yeah.
So what gives me pleasure is I love plants. So I don't want to stop myself growing the thing, but I'm trying to grow things that actually give me pleasure and give sustenance to insects as well. And I don't use any herbicides or pesticides.
No.
That's why the front paved area was such a mess. It's just there's too many weeds come up. I've got to. I
plant in the wrong place. Brett.
I do everything by I do everything by hand, you see.
Yeah.
So, and I've got lots of aphids about, and the campion, the red campion I planted in the wilder area gets absolutely covered, thickly coated with aphids, and every day I was going up and just taking them out, just reducing the number.
You've just reminded me as well, you just tell everybody briefly about your very, very rare ladybird.
Oh yeah, well, this is a bit of a story. I'd never heard of the horseshoe ladybird. In fact, it wasn't even called that back then.
And if you've not heard of it,
well, I hadn't heard of it.
It's got to be rare.
I have now. There's a brilliant coleopterist, beetle expert, who lives in Kidderminster, which is he doesn't anymore, but he did. He lived in Kidderminster, which is about sort of 4 or 5 miles away.
Yeah.
In Worcestershire, just to the south. And he decided to lie on his back in a public park on a February day and look under holly leaves. I know. And he was looking for this ladybird, which is 1.2 millimetres long. This is Britain's smallest ladybird.
Wow.
It looks nothing like the ladybirds you might think of as red with black spots. It's got a lovely coppery elytra, the wing cases, and on them is a yellow horseshoe shape. But it is very tiny, and to see that you need a hand lens. So so you're looking for a tiny green blob, tiny coppery blob on the underside of a leaf. And what it does in
February.
In winter, it lives under ivy leaves or it lives under holly leaves. And so, but you can imagine it's one of Britain's rarest ladybirds. So finding one of these, which is 1.2 on a winter's day and under a holly bush,
that's determination, isn't it?
Or another word, possibly madness. But anyway, Alan Brown, brilliant as he is, lay down under this bush. Not only that, he found 9 of them.
Wow.
And he looked at them, he monitored them to see what they did. And they didn't move in the cold weather. They hung on. They just clung there in
I shouldn't think he did.
diapause. Well, no, he did go home. It's all right. But what he then noticed was in the summer, if he went out to the middle of Kidderminster town and he looked under the leaves of Greater Celandine, that's Chelidonium, he found that the ones that were covered in whitefly had the ladybirds on them, and they were laying eggs nearby, and the whitefly larvae were being eaten by the ladybird larvae. This is a ladybird that specialises in whitefly.
Oh, right.
So then he made the connection. He thought, hang on a minute, so if I've got a place where there's holly or ivy next to where Chelidonium, where the celandine grows, I've got a good chance of finding the ladybird. And nobody knew that.
Wow.
And once he'd put that picture together, suddenly we knew where to look. And it took me a full 3 or 4 years to clock that at the top of my garden was a great mass of greater celandine I've been desperately trying to get rid of because it just spreads like
I thought you were
wildfire.
going to say it took you 3 or 4 years of lying on your back to try and spot
No,
off.
just absolute. And then above it I've got a holly bush.
Wow, yeah.
So I thought, hang on a minute, could it be here? Could it?
Yeah.
We're 5 miles away from Kidderminster. This is one of the rarest ladybirds in the world. So I go up. It was a bank holiday. The traffic was awful, and I thought I'm going to go up the garden. And I turned over a leaf, and there's a little shining coppery blob underneath it.
Wow.
And I took it back to the and I got a lens on it, and I think I shouted out loud. I think I jumped. I thought it was lovely. Anyway, I monitored.
I think I heard you actually. I was in Norfolk at the time.
You could have done. And I thought, I've got it. By Jove, I've got it.
Wow, yeah.
And so the most I've ever counted up there is 63.
Wow.
Which actually is the highest count, I think, of horseshoe ladybird anywhere in the UK.
And probably the world.
Well, no, because it's a pest control agent in Iran.
Oh, really?
So this is actually used commercially. But here, we're on the edge of its range, and it's a native in Britain, but it's rare because of the temperature. It doesn't like too cold winters. Things are getting better for it.
Yeah.
Now we know what to look for, and it's so tiny. I went into my local park, just the one just over there, and there's a holly bush there, and we found 25 under there as well.
Brilliant.
So what it shows is that if you start looking for something, which just shows you what we're missing, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Somebody like this brilliant Alan Brown, he made me, he's done it with so many things, but he made me aware of that, did a little bit of research on his own, allowed other people, gave them the tools to go and look at the job, and suddenly now people are now looking for horseshoe ladybirds, and they are being found. You might have one in your garden. It's worth looking for. They are in they're in your county.
Crikey.
So, you know, it's a matter, I think, of just these hidden worlds and this voyage of discovery we can all go on. Whether it means anything to you, of course, is a different matter. It depends on your temperament. For me, I get perversely excited by finding new things. I mean, it's just
No, it is wonderful.
just
I remember
weird.
I once discovered a new colony of green hairstreak that were living on bramble on the edge of a wood, which had never been recorded there before.
Oh, those
And I
are
was
hard to
just-
see, though, sometimes, aren't
Yeah,
they?
and I was just ecstatic.
Yeah.
And there was no one to tell. I was thinking, I need to scream at someone, but I can't, you know.
Well, we write it up. We've got a society in Worcestershire, as well as the Wildflower Study Group. We've got the Worcestershire Recorders, and these are all, again, very good naturalists of different persuasions. And twice a year we publish a roundup of what's been seen in the county, and so we managed to get some good articles about this ladybird, but about so many other things as well.
Yeah.
And Worcestershire is one of those counties that people think, well, isn't that about? It's all about sauce, isn't it? You know, Worcestershire, but no, you know, it's actually a very rich county. We've got a lot of ancient countryside left, and we've got a lot of unusual species left.
Yeah.
And I think we oh, is it a wood pigeon? We more than pull our weight when it comes to natural history recording, and we make sure the records go off or are recorded. The most important thing you can do is to put things on record, as you know.
Yeah.
You know, make sure that people know about them. And anybody listening to this will say, well, he doesn't always do it as fast as he should, and I don't. And I promise I will do better.
Well,
But
I think if anyone can make the claim that they are recording the local wildlife, it's you, Brett. More than anybody else that I've ever met, that's for sure.
I think it's nice to get people enthused. What we did, because they were doing some flower bed work over there in the local park, and it's right next to the road, the flower bed, people were pulling out the weeds, as they call them. And now I notice that they always leave a bit of the celandine under the holly bush for the ladybirds. So the message has got across. There are some really aware people. Sometimes all you need to do is light that little bit of touch paper and see what happens.
It's all about, and that's the whole reason, well, not the whole, but one of the reasons of making these videos is it's raising awareness. The more you can educate people, the more you can promote the importance of conservation and just highlight what's on your doorstep. You know, that's I think means a lot, because it can make a really big positive difference.
And I think I'm not. there's a phrase that conservation begins at home. I think that's partly true, and I think it's partly not true. I think for the bigger issues we need big direction from above, from the big organisations. We can't do it on our own.
No.
But I think it's also very true that observation, we can make a big difference. You talked about the orange-tipped butterflies, and I can, swear to that as well. None of my neighbours have got orange-tipped breeding because they haven't got the plants that orange-tips like, but they do share mine. So I think you can make a difference, and you can give these things just a little jumping off point, if you like. And even if they don't stay with you, you've given them that first springboard into life, and off they go. And others will come in. Gardens are really weird because they're very impermanent habitats. They're always changing. We're always doing something to chopping this down or turning that bed over. But that actually can be an opportunity.
Absolutely. And they're also a very, very eclectic mix of habitats, which you would not get in the wider countryside.
So you've got these mini mosaics where these tiles that we're sitting on, these tiny briquettes, have got sand in between them. I've got several species of solitary bees in here, but also one day I watched a bee fly emerge and found the pupae. And bee fly, you know bee flies, don't you? And you know what they do?
Well, they parasitise the solitary bees, don't they?
Yeah, but what they do, they gather. They've got a special thing.
Now I know this because of you, because
I
was listening to what you were saying about it on radio. Funnily enough,
at the end of their abdomen.
Yeah, and they actually. Now let me finish this for you, Brett. The tube that they use for depositing the eggs.
Yep.
Is it all right?
The ovipositor,
they actually dip it into the floor to get some ballast to the egg to then throw at the holes.
That's right, more or less. I mean, it's basically.
So you taught me that.
Yeah, well, it's true, and it's actually like a little basket at the end of the abdomen, and the ovipositor goes through it. So what they do, it's like a sand basket, if you like, and they push the egg through it or whatever, and it coats it, and gives it ballast. But I watched this happening here, and I posted the pictures of the pupae as they emerged, and I'd literally stepped out of the back door with a cup of coffee, I think, and I just thought, I don't want to do any work today. I can't be bothered to fire up the computer, or I was waiting for it to fire up, and I sat there and I saw this, and I thought, now I know what the host of that bee fly is, and I posted it on a Facebook page, and Erica McAllister, who's a friend of mine, she's an expert in flies. She's Mrs. Fly, Dr. Fly. She said, "Oh, that's great, because now we know we can link it back to the host, which is often quite difficult to do unless you see it emerging and you know what the host is." So the host was a solitary bee called Andrena nigroinea, which always lives just underneath. Every year they come out in March, early April. They've gone over now, and they come out from little holes at the base of which they make it. They're under there now. They're here now, underneath us. And they will hatch out next spring. And they're solitary bees. And it was lovely, and I just thought, I just put that little piece of the jigsaw together without even getting out of the house.
Yeah.
And
that's just purely from observation, and it's helping paint a bigger picture.
Learning to see is quite difficult. It's an art, and it's something that I've sort of got it in the last literally couple of years.
I remember when I spoke to Alan Titchmarsh about this, he said the best thing you can do in your garden is just sit and watch.
Yeah.
Because and it's so true, because you learn things that you can't read in a book. You can't Google. There's certain things you just cannot discover unless you witness it with your own eyes.
Well, birdwatchers call it. There's the antidote to twitching is arsing, where you just sit there for a long time and see what turns up.
Yeah.
And I would agree with Alan Titchmarsh. I think it's amazing. The more you sit still, the more you see.
Yeah.
You don't have to go charging about all over the place. And sometimes, when the traffic's busy and the prices are going up at the pumps, what better than your little local hidey hole or refuge?
Absolutely,
And this to me is a bit of a sanctuary, I suppose.
Of course it is, yeah. You look at some of the insects in particular that you've identified within this garden.
It's extraordinary.
That are either nationally scarce or almost unheard of for the area.
But anybody could do it.
Yeah.
Anybody could do it, because this was just a flat lawn with a few shrubs when I came here, and a rubbish heap here. And I've only been here 22 years. All this has happened in 22 years.
Wow.
And it's quite exciting, and it's gone through various stages. And the great thing about a garden is if you haven't got enough of this, so if you want a bit more catmint or a few more labiates, you know, dead nettles and salvias and stuff like that, you plant them or you create an area for them.
Yeah.
You can fine tune, can't you?
Yes, yeah.
And I haven't done a lot of it, to be fair.
No, but it's wonderful. It really is a wonderful garden, and I hope that if nothing else, today's discussion, a rather lengthy one but very viable, has, you know, reiterated the importance of what you've done in this garden, you know, whether it's accidental or not.
I've had some, you know, celebrated insect guests, but I've actually attracted you to it today.
Of all the creatures to visit this garden, I am probably the rarest.
I think you are, and
probably also the most absurd as well.
And you've probably stayed longer than most of them as well.
Well, I could go on and on, Brett. I really could, and I think it's truly awe-inspiring what you've done here, and I really hope that, you know, with some of the shots that I can hopefully get before we lose the light completely, when we finish this main piece that I can put in as overlay, obviously over the video, I can do it some justice, you know. And
I've got some photographs.
And obviously, you
if you want to see some. But
so
thank you for coming.
Oh, the pleasure's mine, honestly. And for anybody watching this who are just maybe either starting out in the natural world as they're, you know, or they're just starting as a new, you know, very green naturalist, or they are starting their journey in terms of creating a wildlife garden. So also I get emails all the time which, you know, people saying, right, I've moved into a new house, got my first garden, what do I do? What would your advice to them be in terms of either trying to implement a specific habitat or a way of going about?
Well, it depends what you've got. I think first of all,
I know it's a very broad question.
Well, first of all, I think it's know your size, know whatever. You know, there's no point in thinking oak trees are good for wildlife. I've got a tiny little back courtyard. I'm going to put an oak tree in it. You know, at one end, as you know, it's horses for courses, and so I think it's a matter of knowing what you've got. If you've got a lot of sunlight, then you've got to start thinking about, well, what comes in. I think the first thing to do is to plant a few things out that you like and see what comes in, and that'll give you a measure of the sort of things visiting. You know, nectar for what sort of bees are coming in for nectar or whatever. And then I think, you know, if you've got the room, every pond should have, going back to structure again, as much structure as possible. I think a log pile is always a good thing. A wild area of longer grass, preferably with flowers in, if you can afford the room, I would say. I mean, you know more about this than I do. A pond is really important. A pond with some sunlight as well. Don't have a pond in too much shade. I've got a bit too much shade there. A pond with some sunlight, and just don't be over prescriptive. You know, don't put a straitjacket around your garden and mow everything within an inch of its life. You know, let things breathe a little bit. I was brought up, as I say, my parents were quite regimented as far as what they wanted from a garden. It was very neat, and the edges always had to be cut and everything. My father used to hate coming round here because it was anathema to him. He just saw this as a riot. But I know that I like soft edges, and I like those transitions. So structure, I'd say, is a simple thing. Get as much in as you possibly can, but also know what you want to attract. You know, and if it's and that's where you come in. That's where the advice comes in from somebody who knows their stuff, you know, and knows what makes a good wildlife garden. You don't have to have a wildflower meadow. You don't have to fill it full of buttercups if you don't want to. A lot of plants will provide you with plenty of nectar, but if you want certain things like orange tips, then you've got to have your lady smock or your garlic mustard or whatever if you want them to breed. So it's just knowing a few basic facts and just tweaking a little bit and just see what happens. And it will. It'll happen very quickly, won't it?
Because things turn up, don't they? Whether that's the plants or the insects.
You
know, nature is amazing at bouncing back and creating new habitats, given the chance, isn't it? So, I think. Well, that was about 6 things, but I'll accept it was quite a broad question. So
I'm going to say structure then. All right.
Yes. No, that's a very, very good.
Oh, I thought there's is that the tree bumblebee coming back to its nest?
It looks it.
Yeah, it's got one. So this is. There we go. Yeah. Come on, you know where it is. It's just inside those eaves. What we've got are the first queens are being produced from this. These are tree bumblebees. They arrived in Britain in 2000.
Yep.
naturally from the continent. You know all this, I'm sure.
Doing very well, aren't they?
Well, they're one of the commonest bees in my garden now, and they're the only bumblebees that habitually nest above the ground.
Yeah.
So this
They
one's
often use
using
bird boxes as well, don't they?
bird boxes, and this one's using a little space. But it's produced, the males have probably come and gone now, they've died, so they'll mate. And it's producing queens. I saw one of the fresh queens up in the garden, so
Oh, wow.
it'll produce another generation. So they'll have another nest for later on, possibly
Fantastic. Wow.
in summer, and then only the queens will survive. Anyway, so that's another bit of habitat there.
Conservation in
Sorry.
action without having to do anything.
You were trying to wrap up. Then,
That's all
weren't
right.
you?
It's the nature of the beast. Anyway, no, I'm very, very appreciative of your time today, Brett. I know you're a busy man, and I just hope that. Well, I'm very sure that people watching this will have, gained the small amount of enthusiasm we have for the natural world.
Well, if you've got any questions or anything like that, come back again.
Yeah.
In a
Well,
year's time, or
I
we'll
think the
meet up
next
again
video
and we'll
is
do a
definitely
question and answer thing. That'd be
absolutely.
great
And the
fun.
next video is going to be strawberry spiders and leopard slugs. That's going to be the title. You've offered it. I expect results now.
Okay.
But no, thank you so much for your
It's
time.
been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
No, and I hope it's given. Well, I know it will have given people a lot of enthusiasm to look at the insects and other wildlife on their doorstep. So
Good. That's the main aim.
yes, thank you. Anyway, thank you everybody for watching. If you're still with us at this point, then we applaud you, I think. Please feel free to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Give the video a like and get hold of some of Brett's books. I hope by posting this video, Brett is reaffirmed, just how important your additions to the natural world have been, whether that's the research, the documentation, your voice through radio, and yes, I'm sure many people watching are very grateful, so thank you. And yes, thank you very much for watching yourselves, everybody, and I'm sure I'll be back with many more interviews, and yeah, strawberry spiders and leopard slugs, stay tuned. Thanks for watching, we'll see you soon.